Glenn Danzig says of Earth AD. I don't like Earth AD at all. The songs were played too fast. Certain songs like Earth AD were meant to be played fast, but others, like Devil Lock, weren't meant to be played like that, and the album ended up sounding like one long song. That's because the guys in the band couldn't play. I just couldn't get them to slow down. I mean, a lot of people swear by that album. It's like their Bible. What I prefer are other material. Jerry Only says, if Glenn will give me the 2-inch tape, I'll let you hear what that record really sounds like. Glenn slept through it. We had done a gig at the Santa Monica Civic Center with Black Flag. After the show, they took us to this studio. We recorded from midnight till 9 the next morning. My amps faced one way, Doyle's faced the other way. The robo sat between the two stacks. We recorded it while Glenn slept. The only time Glenn got up was when we did Mummy, Can I Go Out and Kill Tonight? You can hear him lay it down so we could stop the song. Then he went back to bed. We had 24 tracks, and we did tracks where we just let our guitars feedback. That's why you hear all that squealing at the start of FAD. Glenn doesn't even know what's on that tape because he wasn't awake when we did it. I know the way he mixes. He tries to save money and do it in these rinky-dink places. I'm sure he didn't sit down and listen to each of the tracks, and that's what needed to be done. I give what he did a D. It could have been an A+. The whole concept behind Earth AD was Motorhead meets the Misfits. It should have been Walk Among Us and the cream of the crop of thrash. That would have been the right move, but Glenn didn't want to hear that. People considered it the thrash metal Bible. To a certain extent, it is. But it broke up the band. He just wanted to be like everybody else. Welcome, everybody, to a history of rock and roll in film. And rock and roll, it's our first Halloween episode. The Misfits argue about many things. Other people don't like them as much as they don't like each other. It is fascinating, and we shall be exploring various elements of their history today. Various incidents that many of them cannot agree on. We will also take a dip into the history of the band FIENDS and their own Halloween episode. Like other greats, it too was hosted by Donald Pleasance. We will also discuss 2 films central to the themes of the Misfits music, and take a trip back in time to another age of your own host's history. A horror fest, the likes of which has never been equaled in my entire moldy, stinky, musty existence. That's right, it took place when I met my friend Joe Moore in New Jersey, which is where the Misfits are from. So we will talk to him about the greatest horror movie marathon I have ever been subjected to on this plane of existence. There was one in another dimension with 7 extended versions of the Hobbit trilogy. Shirley Temple was there, and so was Machine Gun Kelly. The original one, not the new young one. And the food was terrible, and goddammit, Peter Jackson. How does the guy that made Meet the Feebles and Brain Dead end up doing a 10,000-hour video game-looking movie about stuff that didn't even happen in The Hobbit? Now let's get on with Misfits talk. Now, friends, if you've listened to the history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll before, you know that I tend to make a statement of my biases about the artist I'm talking about for full transparency so that you can evaluate the worth and value of what I'm saying to you and your brain and your life and apply whatever sort of swerves and filters and adjustments you feel you need to make your own conclusions happen. So let me be more specific with this one than I usually am. Usually I just say, I heard them back at this time, and I already been into this kind of music, and I didn't really know about them until I heard blah, 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 this movie came out, or blah, 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 whatever. But let me be clear about Misfits and their music, because I was absolutely destroyed and bowled over and instantly in love with every single song I heard on the Misfits Coffin box set that came out when I was just finishing up high school in the mid-90s. Everything in that set was a revelation to me. And before that, I had heard Walk Among Us. Before that, I had only heard Metallica's covers of Last Caress and Green Hell. So there you go. I have no punk credibility whatsoever. I heard Metallica first, right? So total poser, worthy of decapitation at a punk show, according to many, 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 many people who were there back in the day in the old scene. Now, do I think their work was amazing? Fuck yes. Has it made me happier over the years than most bands I've ever heard and most artists I've ever heard? Yes. Does it still continue to make me happy with no loss of appreciation for how great that work is? Yes. Have I sung full sets of Misfits songs myself with friends of mine at Halloween multiple years in a row? You bet your ass I have. I've done the same for Danzig. Even though I'm not nearly as good a singer as that fella is, I still have fun trying. And his solo career and his work in Samhain, it just taught me how much is like possible in the world of crazy, dark, heavy music. All right? Very inspirational, and I think often misunderstood is a Mr. Glenn Danzig. And I will defend a lot of the stuff he's done musically up to a point, up to about Danzig 7, maybe. That's my bias. I kind of hop off the train at that point. Even, I don't know if I've ever listened to Danzig 7 all the way through. But does that mean I revere the individual personalities in these bands and want to shape your opinion of them into something reverential and honorific? No. Does that mean I'm going to deny the fact that these men are goofs and dorks and incredibly self-important at various times in interviews and in their career? What do you think? I saw the Misfits 2 years ago in the summer at an amphitheater here in Washington, playing with the Distillers and the Damned. And it was one of the best shows I've ever seen in my entire goddamn life. All the bands were great. The Damned, as a side note, I should have seen opening for Rob Zombie on his Sinister Urge tour, but they decided not to show up when the tour got to Seattle. Rob just had to come out and tell us during his set, if you're wondering where the Damned are, so are we. So there's a great doc about them called Don't You Wish We Were Dead? And it's incredibly entertaining. One of the best band stories I've ever heard. I can't do it justice. I don't know how I would talk about them. Maybe I'll do an episode about the young ones. That's when I first heard the Damned, which is not the right era of the Damned to get into them. I know. Back to the main thread here before I get too lost. Sorry. My headphones hit the microphone. I could have edited that out, but I'm feeling saucy. Now, I saw the Misfits, at that amphitheater show. I'll get back to it. Before that, I had seen them at an all-ages club in Seattle called Deviate, playing with Guar in around 2001 or 2-ish, I think is what it was. Before that, in 94 or close to 94, I saw them open for Megadeth on the Cryptic Writings tour at a theater in Seattle. I mostly went to see the Misfits. They had Michael Graves singing at that time, and he jumped into the crowd, and his crotch hit me in the face. It didn't hurt too bad. It was a great performance. And so was the club show. It was fine. It was different band members at that time, but it was pretty fun. But the amphitheater show was unbelievably good. And full credit to Glenn Danzig for how great his voice sounded. Also full credit to Dave Lombardo, formerly of Slayer, and also of Suicidal Tendencies, who I'd seen like 2 years before that at a club in Seattle. He was playing with them. And, of course, various other projects that you know him for. Full credit to AC Slade, rhythm guitarist on that tour for the Misfits. His playing was impeccable. I'm sure Jerry Only's playing was great, too. He was breaking like a bass on every other song and throwing the parts of it out in the crowd. He was having a great time. He was having lots of fun. His vocals were good. Doyle, Wolfgang von Frankenstein, sounded like he was plugged into a Digitech like thrash metal pedal from 1994 directly into the board and was constantly just like stomping around and pulling on the whammy bar and like making vroom noises and pounding on his fretboard while AC Slade played the actual parts. At various times, Doyle's guitar wasn't even coming through the PA. It was still a sight to behold. It was still great music. It was a blast. It was amazing. And I'll always remember that show. Saw Danzig a couple times in 96 on Ozfest with Biohazard, Sepultura, and Ozzy Osbourne when Gerald Holmes was playing guitar for him. It was the Black Acid Devil show. It was great. No love in my heart for Tommy Victor of Prong. I'm sure people like him. I don't get it. But he was playing guitar at the time. I had seen Prong open for White Zombie back in 92 or 93, and they were fine. Didn't move me, whatever. Do your thing, man. But on the I Lucifer I tour, Danzig 7, I saw at a place called the Sky Church in Seattle. Danzig played with Tommy Victor on guitar. Once again, Glenn was really Kermit the Froggy in his vocals, kind of like Gene Simmons can be from time to time. And then he would just hold the mic up to the crowd to sing all the important parts of the song. He had these gauntlet length, like elbow length, latex shiny black gloves filled with sweat constantly. And I'm sure there's a lot of cornstarch in them so you can get them on without a lot of friction. And just like white sweat mixtured with this cornstarch would just come pouring out every time he held the microphone up to his face. It was very gross to be up front and watch that happen every time he sang. I also have one interaction personally with Glenn Danzig that I'll just share later on. It's not important now. I've front loaded this with a lot of chit chat that's not too informative. It's just all about context for my bias. But I'm not going to do. This is another one of those ones that I can't just do like a beginning to end history of Misfits, right? A lot of their history is just like a whole ton of lists. It's all dates in the studio and dates on the road and what songs they played. Like fans are pretty obsessive about them, and rightfully so. There's a lot of strange controversies about their recordings. So I think talking about those recordings is worthwhile enough to kind of give you a window into the attitude of the band and how they operated. I mean, when I look at the recording sessions list on Misfits Central, it starts in June of 1977 for the original, whatever you want to call the original lineup. Okay, we're going to call Jerry Only and Glenn Danzig the original lineup, and then various drummers and a couple of different guitar players. I mean, let's see. There's June 77. There's January 78 to February 78. There is January to February 79. There is June 79, September 79, August 1980, and September 1980, March 81, April 81, June 81, August 81, a Mixolydian studio in Boontown, New Jersey in 81 without another date. There's January 82 at Quad Tech in LA. October 82 at Unicorn in Santa Monica. That is the not Evil Life. That's the Earth AD sessions, I believe, that are referenced in my dramatization of the readings of Glenn and Jerry on this track. Then there is 83 in June. Let's see, Mixolydian and Boonton again. Earth AD, We Bite, Demonomania, Wolf's Blood, Queen Wasp, Devilock, Mommy, Can I Go and Kill Tonight? Then there's July 83. Holy shit. Mostly the same stuff. And then 1985, Real Platinum, Lodi, New Jersey. Producer Glenn Danzig. This Misfits recorded the original versions of these tracks in January 78. In 1985, Danzig added extra bass and guitar overdubs. He removed the 1, 2, 3, 4 introductions to She and Angel Fuck from the original mixes, but added similar introduction to Some Kind of Hate. Unlike the original mix, this theme for a jackal comes to a complete stop as the music fades out. This is according to MisFitsCentral.com, by the way. 1986, Glenn Danzig is remixing sessions from 79, from 80, and 82. In 86, Danzig remixed these songs at Real Platinum for inclusion on Collection 1, songs 1 through 3, which are Where Eagles Dare, Skulls, and Astro Zombies, and the Enter at Your Own Risk compilation album, songs 4 and 5, which are 20 Eyes and Violent World, which was never released. The mixes of songs 4 and 5 are almost identical to the original mixes. Now, this gets interesting here, too. August 86 and September 87, we see, according to Eerie Vaughn, 5 of these songs, all except Cough Cool, were intended for a proposed Walk Among Us 2 album. He and Danzig recorded songs 1 and 2, Mephisto, Waltz, and Hate Breeders, on August 8th, 86. Song 3 on September 3rd, 87. That's Cough Cool. And songs 4 through 6 on September 10th, 1987. That's Brain Eaters, Nike, A Go-Go, and Devil's Whorehouse. For Cough Cool, Danzig re-recorded the vocals and keyboards and also added additional guitar and drum machine tracks. Eerie provided the distorted bass track. For Devil's Whorehouse, they added extra guitar, bass, vocals, and an electronic drum accent to the August 1981 mix of the song. Danzig later included all these songs on Collection 2 after giving up on the Walk Among Us 2 idea. Then it jumps to 1997. That version of it, let's see. Oh, that version is a remix by Glenn Danzig of Static Age songs and Evil Live Music. She, Spinal Remains, and In the Doorway. Oh, no, those are publishers. Excuse me. Publisher, Static Age Music, and Evil Live Music for She and Spinal Remains and In the Doorway. At this session, Caroline Records remixed and mastered these 3 songs to sound like the rest of the songs from Static Age. For In the Doorway, they used the music and first half of the vocals from the second take of the song, and the second half of the vocals from the first take. I mean, this is, oh my God. So much detail. Let's see. Then there's the infamous, I think it's 10, what is it? The 12 Hits from Hell album. Caroline Records remixed and remastered all 13 takes from the Master Sound production session master for the release on the canceled 12 Hits from Hell. These mixes featured a hybrid sound with both Bobby, Steele, and Doyle's guitar tracks mixed into the center. This was a session on the 26th and 27th of July, 2001 in Westside Music, Tenafly, New Jersey. And about 12 Hits from Hell, we can learn a bit about the band. Even further, let's see. I want to read from what I believe to be an unbiased source, academickids.com/encyclopedia. This is titled The Missing Misfits Album. On August 7, 1980, Misfits recorded 12 songs with the intention of releasing a full-length album. The Misfits signed a record deal with Ruby Records after the recording and used the 1980 sessions as a demo for their release, Walk Among Us. The full length expected from these sessions was never released. Although the Misfits never recorded as a five-piece band, the purpose of this new release is to showcase both Bobby Steele's and Doyle's contributions equally. Bobby Steele, the Misfits guitarist since 1978, although in that sentence they don't mention when he was kicked out, recorded both rhythm and lead tracks for most of the songs. But he was kicked out of the band midway through production. His parts were subsequently de-emphasized in the mix, although he is credited on 3 Hits from Hell as extra guitarist. Jerry Only's younger brother Doyle was inducted into the band and finished the recording session by adding and or overdubbing guitar tracks. The songs only ended up in the hands of the general public through a 7-inch vinyl, 3 Hits from Hell, and bootlegs. The tracks also appeared on the Misfits box set. In 2001, Caroline Records announced it would be releasing the lost 1980 sessions of Halloween on Halloween under the name 12 Hits from Hell. There would also be an alternate take of London Dungeon included. Glenn Danzig abruptly called off production, announcing that there were errors in the liner notes. Eerie Vaughn, Danzig's ex-bassist, compiled the liner notes, so it is rumored the real reason Danzig called off production was because he was upset that his ex-bassist was so close to the project. Danzig also claims he was angered by not receiving any word of this project until he was mailed a promotional CD. Misfits bassist Jerry Only claims the production is substandard and needs to be remixed. Bobby Steele, who was kicked out of the band during recording, feels Jerry Only has a hidden agenda behind wanting to remix it. The Misfits always told the public Steele was kicked out because he was a shoddy guitarist, while Steele has always felt he was forced out of the band because Only wanted his brother, Doyle Von Frankenstein, to be the guitarist. Steele thinks the CD should be released as is, so it'd be proven once and for all that he's not a bad guitarist. Steele is convinced Only will remove all his guitar tracks from the final product to prevent being exposed a liar. Caroline Records' official reasoning is that the mastering is inferior and that the Misfits feel they should not be portrayed as a 5-piece, which is odd considering bands routinely double and triple track their guitars, and the liner notes make it clear that Doyle and Bobby were not in the band at the same time. Besides, no one has a problem with Robbie Alter's contributions to 2 songs, and he wasn't even a member. So there's even a radio program from a few years back of Henry Rollins talking about and playing 12 Hits from Hell in its entirety compared to the previously released versions of the tracks, and talking about how much better he thinks it sounds, how it's much more definitive Misfits. If you can get your hands on it, download it for free, but he thinks that the band should release it. Bobby Steele's very conspiratorial. He's got some online statements he wrote up back in the early 2000s, I believe is when it was, talking about how Jerry Only has the same birthday as Hitler, and he also wants to rewrite history, et cetera, et cetera. They obviously don't like each other. Bobby Steele is on YouTube being interviewed about various eras of his Misfits, experience, and you can find that out. That I can't cover everything, or even close to a tenth of what may or may not be actual Misfits history or trivia, because there are a lot of conflicting accounts of what happened back from like 78 to 83. And depending on who's pissed at who and who has heard the tapes and who has the tapes, you can't really trust any of the actual band members for their narrative of what happened. It's all very self-serving. That's what makes good drama, though, and makes good stories. Now, let me get another element out of the way here. I just want to run down a list of all the people that have ever played in the Misfits from 77 to 83. After that, I don't care. I really don't care. Although I do like a handful of songs from the Michael Graves era. No slouches, those Misfits on the mid-90s sort of recordings that they made. I do love songs like Dig Up Her Bones and Scream and Saturday Night, especially Forbidden Zone. I got no hate for the music and the writing of that era. Plenty of hate for present day Michael Graves, as he's chosen to portray himself on social media. But that's something I don't feel like talking about. If you thought Glenn Danzig was a douchebag, anyway.
vocals and bass in the beginning were Glenn Danzig and Diane DePiazza, who I don't believe recorded anything. She was she rehearsed and she was there with Jimmy Battle playing guitar. I might be wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong. Whatever. Either she's recorded at some point or she's not recorded at some point, but she's not very well known or mentioned very often as a bassist for the Misfits. Though she did do some art design on one of the first versions of Cough Cool as a single. So obviously was a friend of the band and kind of joined in at the very early stages while Glenn was just like playing an electric piano through a distortion pedal or a fuzz box that's normally meant for guitar to record Cough Cool. And then She, there's the really cool electric piano version of She is a bit jarring for fans that have never heard the non-guitar version of it. I highly recommend, if you haven't heard all the stuff on the box set, just to check it out. Great song about Patty Hearst. Also mentioned in my Randall Flagg video on YouTube. If you want to check that out, if you're a Stephen King fan, I read all about Randall Flagg's introduction in The Stand and all the people that he is mentioned being connected to. Anyway, you can find that link in my link tree, I'm sure. Then Jerry Only joins around March 77, according to Misfits Central, and Manny is on drums still. He played with Jimmy Battle and Diane. Then we get Franche Coma on guitar, playing with Manny, Jerry, and Glenn. Then we get Mr. Jim joining on drums, that same crew. Then instead of Franche Coma, we got Rick Riley on guitar, and Mr. Jim sticks around on drums. Then we get Glenn, Jerry, Bobby Steele, Joey Image. Bobby's guitarist, Joey's drummer. Then we get Glenn, Jerry, Bobby Steele, Arthur Googie on drums. And this is about the time that we're going to talk about Eerie Von getting notice from Doyle at school. They're like, hey, are you playing drums? Because Misfits are going to need another drummer pretty soon. And when Arthur Googie is playing drums in the band with Doyle on guitar, Eerie Von starts taking their photos up in this cave like 2 hours away from where they live in Lodi, New Jersey, and starts getting the invitation to go to shows with them and take their pictures at those gigs while he's down in the pit, dodging elbows and boots to the face. Then we get Glenn, Jerry, Doyle, and Todd Swalla, who's on drums. And then the lineups from there pretty much are just changing drummers. After Todd Swalla is Robo, and that's around 82 and 83. Then we get a guy named Brian Damage in 83, towards the end of that year. Oh, no, I take it back. He's only there for a short time. He's credited as October, but October 29th features Todd Swalla on drums. So if your band goes through lots of drummers, don't feel sad. It's not just you. It's also, one of the greatest bands of all time. Now, this timeline is more complex than 70s X-Men Chris Claremont, or even worse, 90s X-Men timelines. And I can't do enough jumping around to keep things in chronological order because there are so many conflicting arguments and statements about who was doing what when. But I do understand that I left you hanging when it comes to the Eerie Von on drums aspect of things. Because for the most part, I never read anything about Eerie Von actually playing drums in Misfits. Just that he was their photographer for the most part and then joined up with Glenn when it was time to get things moving along with Sam Hain or Samhain. Since I've read interviews with Glenn that even he says, I don't expect people to pronounce it Samhain. I'm going to call it Sam Hain. I now have 3 different sources to talk about the same almost non-event in Misfits history, and that is Eerie Von on drums. So Eerie Von, in an interview I listened to on the Cobras and Fire Rock podcast, gave a great 2-parter where he talked about his whole time working with everything Danzig, in his first meetups that I talked about earlier in class with Doyle, et cetera, all the way through the end of his time in the band Danzig and what he saw going on with the whole Rick Rubin thing. I can't right now do the Danzig history justice after the Misfits. Maybe someday if I think of a movie to tie that in with, who knows? But he does talk about, after the aforementioned, inquiry from Doyle about, do you play drums? He went to the Boys Club, which I assume is like a YMCA kind of thing in near Lodi, New Jersey, and gets some free drum lessons. Then he reaches out to a friend of his who plays in the drum line in the marching band in high school. And a guy that he says is like really, really very studious. And their instructor at school was a real, hard ass on him. And they played with really, really heavy drumsticks and stuff. And they did all the exercises to perfection to be that precise for the marching band or the drum corps or whatever. And he went to the guy with some Misfits recordings that he'd been given by Doyle, and he said, how do I learn this beat? What is it? And he goes, okay, let me listen. And he figures it out. He goes, okay, here, let me show you how to play it. And he plays it. He's like, okay, cool. Well, I got to learn like all their songs. So what is this song? And then he goes, that's the same beat. And he's like, okay, well, how about this song? He's like, yeah, that's the same beat. That's the same beat. If you just learn this beat, I think you're going to have. So he does. He works on that one beat. And according to Erie, when the time came, he tried out for the Misfits in the form of basically Glenn Danzig saying, okay, play me a beat. And Erie says, I played that beat. And he goes, okay, you're good. That was the beginning and the end of his tryout for the Misfits, according to him. Now, it's Misfits Central that gives sort of the only indicator I've found in my time, and I'm not an expert on the Misfits. I'm just a lover. I'm a lover of rock and roll, and I'm a lover of the Misfits music. I am not pretending to be anything other than a person who wants to share what I can. Not definitive here, but going by MisfitsCentral.com, in May of 1982, they state one Friday night in May, Misfits photographer and roadie Erie Von rehearsed with the band and was offered the drummer position. On the following Monday, however, he turned down their offer and decided to stay with his band, Rosemary's Babies. During this month, Jerry and Doyle practiced with their brother Rocky on drums. Rocky just got back, I believe, from being their roadie at the infamous 1982 gig at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And we will get into that in detail a little bit later. But the drummer spot was open because after that trip to California, there was a fight with Glenn, or a disagreement with Glenn and Arthur Googie about whether or not the Misfits could afford to let Arthur Googie have a second McDonald's hamburger at lunch one day. That leads to the Misfits not being able to record their Earth AD EP as planned in Southern California during that trip. They would do it about a year or so later. This is the time, according to Misfits Central, that Glenn is also talking to future drummer Brian Damage while he was a member of the band Genocide about also joining the Misfits. Now, in the Cobras and Fire interview, which I will have a link to in the description so you can check it out yourself, Erie talks about the fact that, he played drums with Glenn in Sam Hain later after the Misfits sort of break up until they keep trying people out, and Erie flat out tells Glenn, look, I can't keep up with this stuff. Like, I can play a few different beats, but I can't execute the vision that you have for this musically. And Glenn just encourages him to pick up the bass. So he gets rid of his drums and he buys a bass. Now, if I mean to keep using Misfits Central as a resource, and I do, I should probably tell a little bit of a tale about their origins. According to quotes from the creator of Misfits Central in This Music Leaves Stains by James Green Jr., let's see. This is Mark Kennedy, a high schooler in the late 80s who was obsessed with Misfits and was frustrated by the lack of useful info pertaining to their recorded output. He, in 89, pieced together what would be the ultimate Misfits release timeline to try to make sense of the convoluted history that he had heard about or gathered from probably buying a lot of bootlegs and seeing what the recording dates were on them, that he would start with the Trouser Press Record Guide and then go from there after buying every single audio release, legitimate or otherwise, he could get his hands on up through 1993. Now, he also started writing letters to Jerry Only of the Misfits and asking him questions. Jerry was super nice to him and very receptive and sent him some materials that would help him out. And what had sort of grown to about 30 or 40 pages of information eventually gets expanded into something called the Misfits book, self-published by Mark Kennedy himself. And then in May of 94, he launches the Misfits Bible Internet mailing list, where other fans could sort of stay in touch with what he was doing and general Misfits going on, which includes, I'm sure, the legal proceedings taking place at that time, which I will have to get into a little bit later in this episode. But the point of this all is he eventually takes this live on the internet, and it becomes Misfits Central. And now I'll read straight from the text of James Green Jr.'s, where he says, the Misfits Bible and Misfits Central would both mushroom from tiny online enclaves to bustling centers of activity for fiends from across the globe, who were finally getting Misfits news more or less directly from the horse's mouth, or at least one half of the horse's mouth, which refers to Jerry Only, or Jerry and Doyle. Mark Kennedy would not have a chance to interact with the other half, Glenn Danzig, until long after his online Misfits hubs were established. Though the singer was alerted to the existence of Misfits Central shortly after its creation, naturally, Danzig dismissed the website as probably all bullshit. When Kennedy managed to wrangle a private audience with the singer following a November 1999 gig in Washington, D.C., Danzig was convinced Misfits Central was in fact all bullshit and let its creator know in no uncertain terms. Mark Kennedy himself says, they bring me backstage after some gig to meet Glenn, and as soon as I'm introduced, he fucking explodes. Your website is full of fucking lies. I should fucking kill you right now. So I said, all right, I'm sorry. You tell me what's incorrect and I'll fix it. Danzig relaxed, and he said he'd get back to him with specifics. As of this book's printing, Mark Kennedy still has yet to receive Glenn Danzig's list of inaccuracies on Misfits Central, though a link once appeared on Danzig's official website to Mark Kennedy's site and has long been removed. Copyright for this book is 2013. Now, if you want a truly horrific experience, I would say don't watch The Monster from Green Hell. I would say listen to the song by Misfits and then read the lyrics and get that crazy, crazy, wild feeling that you get when you hear a good, scary song about terror. The lyrics are evocative of things that do happen in the film, or the sort of feeling that the characters in the film would have, or I guess to take it another step further and probably more accurately, an omnipotent, omniscient observer into the thoughts and the souls of the protagonists of the film. You know, here in this place lies the genie of death. Touch it, see it. Here in this place is a means to your end. Touch it, feel it, green hell. You come to this like no one could. I bet you never knew you woke it. And don't you run away from anything. I bet you thought you really could in hell. We're going to burn in hell, green hell like every hell, but kind of green, which I love that line. We're going to face the mess. We're in hell. Green hell, I think I'd rather be up here. Just say in hell, green hell after each one. I fucking shake apart. Got to find a way that you will stay. Cannot forget about the heat. Hell is green. I need a flame. You come to this like nobody could. I bet you never knew you woke it. And you don't run away from anything. I bet you thought you really could take it. Here in your place lies the key to your death. Touch it, see it. Here in this place is a means to your end. Touch it, feel it. Green hell. Etc., etc. More repeats. The poster for Green Hell says, "Nightmare thrills beyond belief. The mammoth monster that terrorized the earth. Monster from Green Hell." Now, I guess technically it terrorizes the earth in that it is on earth and it does do some terrorizing. But it does it in a small sort of span of space and geology and geography. 'Tis not the earth so much as the African Sahara, I believe. And it involves, not the earth's population necessarily as much as some tribes people and some British explorers / scientists. Man, I tell you, this movie checks all the boxes of a, post World War II black and white giant bug monster movie. It really does it all, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I say not necessarily because I assume some of you, might like a lot of atomic age giant bug movies a lot. Okay, I've seen quite a few. Admittedly, mostly through Mystery Science Theater episodes, which is sort of the equivalent to science fiction speaking of what I say elsewhere in this episode or the next episode, depending on how I edit things, about how I came to learn the songs of the band Fear and the Misfits through heavy metal bands first. So my credibility is lacking in a lot of ways. But that does not mean I'm not a competent analyst when it comes to what makes up this film. I wonder if the title of this has any connection to Eli Roth's Green Inferno. I wonder if that was a inspiration for it. I'm sure there's a lot of other horror aficionados that could point to exactly where he got that name from. Maybe it was another Inferno movie. I'm sorry if I've made you mad, but that's what it made me think of initially. At the beginning of the movie, there are, African tribes people talking about finding a dead body near the Green Hell. I don't believe the movie explains why that area or that patch is called the Green Hell. There's a doctor that notes the cause of death in that dead body is from poison, like snake venom, but no snake could contain a volume of venom like the amount found in this dead man's veins. The monster appears in the first 10 minutes. This movie gives you the impression at first that it's not fucking around. But really, it's about to remove the monster from the rest of the film for a long, long time, and all the excitement from the film for a long, long time, and make you suffer for quite a while. So if you didn't go to the drive-in movie when this came out with somebody to, have a little smoocheroo with, you were totally bored for a long time during this film. I should say that what I said about the beginning of the film was about the beginning of the plot and the action that happens. The real beginning of the film is another one of those tropes of post-World War II atomic age mutant bug movies or any kind of mutant monster movies where you have scientists pontificating alone in a lab, being very philosophical about our place in the universe or our place in the world or our place in the galaxy, and just sort of musing to themselves in a sort of semi-expository hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge narration that sounds a little something like this.
No, it seemed to be a drill-shaped thing, evolving. No, it must have been my imagination, but it makes me realize how desperately alone the Earth is. Hanging in space like a speck of food floating in the ocean. Sooner or later to be swallowed up by some creature floating by. Oh, come now. Time will tell, Dr. Mason. We can only wait and wonder. Wonder how. Wonder when.
That's right, kids. Our doom is inevitable. Now, as I've said, this movie's got a lot of great giant bugs, which sometimes is a prop kept mostly out of the shot, a little piece of a giant bug at a time. Other times it's just another staple of this era of scary filmmaking, which is close-up footage of actual bugs doing actual bug things around other actual bugs, but magnified to look like they're giant, and then intercut with footage of people reacting to how large they appear to them. Let's see. We've got our stock footage that takes up a lot of space and a lot of time, which is just film of planes landing or taking off, or tribes people running across the Sahara Desert or other. I guess not Sahara Desert, but I don't know where green hell is. I didn't pay enough attention if they actually told me. I'm just used to saying the phrase Sahara Desert. But you got a lot of footage, maybe not necessarily filmed for this motion picture, of people running around in Africa doing stuff. You've got, a lot of scientists at various times, even the ones that aren't necessarily our protagonists, because it's the middle of the 20th century and we're kind of scared of what scientists are up to because they're attacking God with their science. They're attacking nature with their science. There's cages with animals being tested upon. There's mentions of Hiroshima and what radiation could do to animals now, or what radiation then might have done to animals all around the world. We don't know. There's another great element of this kind of filmmaking. A lot of minimal string and horn scoring, which is to say, not orchestrated. Very, very cheap. Couple of horns, couple of strings. There's always the a good fussy white-suited British person behind a desk in Africa because of colonialism. We have someone who spent 40 years among the natives, the main doctor, Lawrence, at the beginning. Good man. He's the one you can trust. There's lots of scenes of people trudging through the jungle. Some of it could be somewhere near Los Angeles. I can't figure it out or look it up right now. There's a giant insect head, like a rubber head that does a lot of the work when it comes to the appearances of the monster. Pops in and out of the brush with also maybe, if you're lucky, one claw to grab a victim around the neck and instigate your fears of being attacked by giant insects. But not the whole body, not the whole appendage. That's not going to happen. I love the idea that this monster keeps getting away so fast without anyone being able to see it escape or flee from them. And it can arrive very suddenly without being heard, or knocking around in the brush to push things aside to get to its victims. It just appears. All of a sudden, people are walking along quietly, and it's just someone's grabbed by the neck, and then they disappear. And of course, it wouldn't be a proper black and white giant bug or giant monster film without tons of expository dialogue about the weapons that will be brought to bear against the giant wasp menace. And lines like, "Hey, watch it with those little bombs," when they're stockpiling some grenades to throw. Film is very boring. And it's hard to get through. Then at the end, there's a couple of major confrontations with the giant wasps and grenades and things blowing up until they are trapped near an erupting volcano. And because they only have one way to escape from the giant wasps, and then because the giant wasps, the monsters from Green Hell, if you will, has to come around to another part of the volcano to finally take out our protagonists. It just happened to work out that was the side of the volcano that was going to be the most destructive to the evil monsters that were attacking our good Christian protagonists. And they get a very self-satisfied bit of a dialogue at the end.
Well, it took a volcano to do what we failed to do.
Nature has a way of correcting its own mistakes.
My father must be pleased.
death of the creatures will bring about the deliverance of my people. The gods have been kind. They've taught us as Dr. Lawrence taught us. Have faith.
Which would almost be justified if it wasn't the fact that it was man's intervention in nature's world that created the mutation of these giant wasps in the first place. It was, and I realize I didn't set this up for you as a listener, but it was an experiment that blasted a bunch of animals into space that caused all these problems because the rocket that carries all the wasps malfunctions, goes off course, dropping into Africa, somewhere off the coast. So no, nature did not at all correct its own mistake. But like so many films of its ilk, it ends with, sky full of smoke, and then people looking up into the sky and feeling safe for the first time in many, many days while the horns go, blah, 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 to let you know that you should reckon your own conscience with the actions of man. Don't sleep tonight. Feel guilty. Blah, blah, blah.
So now you know where the inspiration for Green Hell comes from. Later we will talk about those teenagers from outer space. They'll take your weak resistance and throw it in your face. They are the angel mutants. The streets for them seduction. Their cause unjust and ancient in this B-film born invasion. But now let's get back to the Bobby Steele era. In an early Misfits press release, it was stated that Bobby Steele was related to British actress Barbara Steele from Hammer Films and spent his youth skinning live cats. It also said Joey Pills has been intimate with every young female in New York he's met. The black rings under Jerry Only's eyes are the result of a rare pigment defect. And that Danzig almost died when he was born in Hackensack Hospital. Your narrator believes that all these things are true and verifiable. Don't you?
Misfits fall into a really weird place in the timeline of punk history and rock and roll history. Because, they come out of Lodi, New Jersey with their first single back in 1977 on their own label. And they're doing this at a time that's before the New York hardcore scene as it would become. And they're in a dip in the timeline, like a slump or a valley that comes after the major label punk scene in Manhattan. They did play a couple shows at CBGB in 77, toured, a lot through 77 and 78 with building up a good national following. But they were on their way up when 70s punk in America was kind of collapsing after its first big wave, as far as when, labels were trying to scoop up what was happening and make some money off of it. So it's the end of an era business-wise. Not for the music, though. But then they had a hard time getting clubs to book them, in this sort of post-1978 era. They kind of give up on trying to play a lot around New York. They never bothered to try to fit into the underground punk scene when it didn't take hold. And then they tried embracing it on sort of a national level. And because of that focus, because they shifted away from, popularity in the neighborhood, back to Chuck Berry, if you listen to that episode, instead of him trying to be hardcore blues guy, he wanted to embrace his love of Nat King Cole, and he wanted to be noticed by labels outside of, St. Louis, and therefore he goes up to Chess Records in Chicago to break, to get out of his region, not be stuck trying to be the king of it or compete with people in his regional sort of orbit. Misfits took a similar sort of tack. They're not going to get stuck in the bloated, decaying corpse of pre-hardcore New York City punk, post, CBGB boom New York City punk, especially if no one gives a shit about them there, right? Except for their diehard fans. Like, they never went back to CBGB after 77, I don't think. And, the big rival for CBGB was Max's Kansas City. And when they played there in 79, someone threw a glass at Bobby Steele and he hucked it right back into the crowd, hit somebody in the face with it, and then they got banned from Max's Kansas City. So what the fuck you gonna do with, New York and clubs then if you're a punk band and punk is cooling off? Also, it's a great excuse to just not book Misfits shows. If you've heard that story about Max's, and if you've heard that CBGB isn't booking them either, then that's not a great reputation to have. So there's a lot of drama around the Bobby Steele thing, which is funny to me as an old person who has gone through different band things and lineup changes, and it's this goes back to the defining characteristic of the Misfits story being so contentious, and there's so much documentation of who did what when, and no one can agree on it. It's like all of history, as a matter of fact. There's, the versions of the story that I've read. There's the one version I already read. There's versions that Bobby Steele will tell you in interviews on YouTube, right? But I want to read from Going Underground, American Punk, 1979 to 1989, George Hirschala's book that I'm pulling some stories about Fear and SNL from on this episode. Because according to this text, let's see, the lack of visibility in 1981, though the Misfits managed sporadic shows across the country, was partly due to Bobby Steele being replaced on guitar in 1980 by bassist Jerry Only's younger brother, Paul, a.k.a. Doyle. It was apparently a move on Jerry's part to gain greater control over the band and give it a cohesive image, though he claimed at the time it was because Bobby Steele had lost interest. At the time, Glenn Danzig blamed it on Steele's drug use, and years later said he never wanted Steele in the band in the first place, so was happy to see him go. According to Steele, Jerry never told him when rehearsals were, and then Jerry would tell the rest of the band that Bobby wasn't coming and that he'd get Doyle to fill in. Steele promptly formed the Undead, and the two bands were booked together at the Ritz in December of 81. This did not reflect any diminishing of bad blood between them, though as Danzig ad-libbed lyrics that night to ridicule and threaten Steele. For his part, Jerry Only has freely admitted that he saw it as important for the band to develop their trademark image that was cemented with the addition of Doyle. He remembers being in CBGB in 77 and seeing the Ramones come in and being impressed that they were a team with a set image. The muscular, snarling Doyle, only 15 when he joined the band, with his pronounced devil lock, became the quintessential Misfits look that fans readily associate with the band more than any other member. But Doyle wasn't able to play the guitar well because his hands were too big, according to Glenn. And he claimed they had to simplify the song structures for him. The band didn't start playing out with Doyle until much later in summer 81. The change definitely marked a shift into a simpler, straight-ahead punk sound than the early Misfits material. For his part, I've read accounts of Bobby Steele, his story, that he wasn't in all the sessions for 12 Hits from Hell because he was waiting for Jerry to come pick him up, and Jerry just didn't do it. From, let's see, Bob Cotter's account of their complete discography, which you can find on Google Books and sort of skim through various pages of in the hopes that you'll purchase it for yourself. When he writes about 12 Hits from Hell, let's see, he says, I wasn't sure whether to put this in with the official releases or not. The reason being that it was and it wasn't, and all of the versions that have followed have been bootlegs. Reportedly, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 CD copies were pressed before Glenn and Jerry decided they didn't like the cover artwork or the mixes. Vinyl copies soon surfaced, but they are all bootlegs, as are any of the CDs available. Tom Petty once said, "It's one thing to play a pattern on drums, but another thing to make it swing." 12 Hits from Hell swings. They found a groove that they wouldn't quite match on Misfits' Walk Among Us, as great as that album is. The beat is slightly slower on these recordings, unlike the somewhat herky-jerky sped-up versions on Walk Among Us, which sounds like a band that is champing at the bit to thrash, but couldn't bring itself to for whatever reason, at least not yet. But the crucial difference between the two albums is really one song. Mommy, Can I Go Out and Kill Tonight? Its inclusion on Walk Among Us very clearly signaled the direction that their live shows were already taking, as well as it being a signpost for Earth AD. Bob Cotter goes on. Okay, here's the story. In the August of 1980, the band, which consisted of Glenn, Jerry, Bobby, and Googie, recorded 12 songs at Master Sound Productions, the legendary MSP sessions. Obviously enough for an album. The album was mixed in September. In October, they kicked Bobby out of the band and replaced him with Doyle, whom Jerry had been grooming to take over from Bobby. Although Doyle recorded and overdubbed tracks with his own acts, the resulting work was shelved. This is rather surprising, as Danzig was never one to waste money on something he wasn't going to release. And it turns out that he didn't, at least not totally. 5 of the songs saw light of day as the 3 Hits from Hell EP and the Halloween single, meaning A and B side, so that's 5 total. The rest of the cuts would eventually crawl out of the grave on Legacy of Brutality, the Misfits Collections 1 and 2, and the Coffin box set. The leftovers were used as demos for Walk Among Us, but by combining Bobby and Doyle's guitars, Daddy Warbucks Danzig, either consciously or not, had stumbled upon a fuller sound than his band ever had, and maybe should have had all along. That's another reason that 12 Hits from Hell swings. The new songs like London Dungeon and Horror Hotel rock with a vengeance, and the newer versions of old songs like Night of the Living Dead and Where Eagles Dare are meaty, beady, big, and bouncy. Haha, that's a Who reference for anyone that doesn't know it. Leaving their original versions eating dust. The same goes for the songs that remained until the release of Walk Among Us, like Vampira and Astro Zombies, which never sounded better than on 12 Hits from Hell. Obviously, Danzig didn't agree because he recorded a whole bunch of them himself, but we'll get back to that in another episode. Now, who the Misfits are or were can be explored endlessly just through the Bobby Steele era and the various conflicts there. He says, we were at rehearsal discussing an upcoming show. They wanted to open the set by coming out of coffins. My idea was to fill the coffins with rats. It was right after that film Nosferatu had came out. Visually, it would have been great, but they were bummed. So that's got to be the Werner Herzog Nosferatu, not the original, with starring Max Schreck Nosferatu, which is super, super old at that point. I said, the crowd is going to... Wait. So it's his idea to put rats in the coffins, but he's also the one that said the crowd is going to stomp them to death. So we'll give them all strychnine, and whichever ones get past the crowd will die from poison. He says, that was the last time I ever heard from them. A guy called me around 86, 87 and told me that the reason, that was the reason Jerry gave for kicking me out. I've heard so many different reasons. At the time, Glenn didn't want to tell me why. He told me to call Jerry. He told me it was because I sucked at guitar. Doyle was better. I told him on the spot, I'm a far better guitarist. Well, Doyle looks better. That's what it was. I've always suspected that Jerry wanted his brother in the band so Jerry could have more influence. When I was in the band, Glenn was the leader. What he said went. As you can see, Jerry has taken control of the Misfits and is doing his own thing with it. Then Jerry will say, the reason we picked Bobby to take Frank's spot was this. 1, Bobby was from Jersey. 2, Bobby was covering Sex Pistols songs and had an idea about what we were doing. The problem was Bobby's problems were bigger than the band problems. If Bobby had something to do, then the band came second. It always seemed Bobby would show up and not have a guitar, so he'd have to use Doyle's. Then he'd break all of Doyle's strings, and Doyle would come to me and say, why do you let this guy use my guitar? I said, until you're ready, we've got to do this. You've got to hang in there. We eventually replaced Bobby with Doyle, and the rest is history. Doyle's a phenomenon as far as guitar players go. And then Glenn would say, Jerry didn't want Bobby anymore. Originally, I didn't want Bobby in the band at all. They wanted Bobby out and Doyle in. I said, look, I don't really care, but don't lead on Bobby anymore. I was teaching Doyle stuff on guitar, and it wasn't working. His hands were just too big, as we said before. Eventually, they didn't tell Bobby, so I did. They wanted him to come down to the show and not know he was out or something, which was not cool. Now, if you're not familiar with a lot of the Misfits' history, You might be forgiven for thinking Bobby Steele was only there for a short time, just did some, recording and live dates, and then Doyle became the definitive guitarist of the Misfits. But that's not the case. He was there for a lot of pivotal moments in their history. He was there for their rise up to being, important enough or noticeable enough to go to the UK and play with the Damned and be part of the whole incident that inspired the lyrics for London Dungeon. So let's hear a bit from Bobby about his introduction to the Misfits. He says he was looking to get in a serious band, came home one night, and he had a message from this guy, Glenn of the Misfits. He says, all I knew of them was cough cool. So I wasn't even going to call them back. I thought it was a horrible sounding record, no guitar, just keyboards through a distortion pedal. I wasn't interested, but I figured, what the hell? I went down and went through 5 or 6 songs with them. Now, your narrator pauses here for his own interjection. I could only imagine myself in the late 70s hearing Cough Cool and being extremely mystified and intrigued and wanting to meet whoever did this. Maybe not join their band because they're not a hard-edged, loud, violent punk rock thing. If that's what you're into, playing on guitar, there's there's no guitars. But I would at least think you would go, oh, what would they want guitars to do? I'm curious. This is interesting, But Bobby Steele is Bobby Steele. He doesn't think it's going to be good, except for the fact that he drives down to meet them and run through 5 songs. Sure, okay, whatever. Maybe I'm being hard on him because he seems a bit self-righteous these days in his YouTube interviews where he's wearing a shirt that says Jesus beat the devil and talks about how great it was that they said Bobby Steele's an asshole on one of their recordings or whatever because it sold a lot of records for his next band. Okay, fine, whatever. Honestly, I think Bobby Steele's probably one of the coolest guitar players to be in the Misfits of all time. There's not a lot of them, but still, I think he deserves whatever credit he can get these days. Let's think. Well, I'm gonna circle back to that whole Jesus beat the devil thing here in a second. Let's see. Going back to what he was saying about that first sort of tryout session, he goes, "We were playing in Jerry's garage, so Jerry only. You couldn't hear anything. A lot of the stuff that happens in the Misfits in the days happens at Jerry and Doyle's place because they have a good job and their dad's got money, and they end up taking a lot of members of the Misfits in to live with them when they have no other place to live. This is Misfits Central, basically. Everyone has to sort of commute there to do tryouts or to do rehearsals. He says, you couldn't hear anything. I don't know what that means. We were playing in Jerry's garage. You couldn't hear anything. I guess it wasn't very well baffled or goboed for sound absorption. They played the Static Age sessions for me. That's when I got interested. When I got home that night, I told my friend Bobby Snots, I tried out for this band that wanted me to play guitar. He told me, do it, man. This band's starting to move. That's how it started. A week later, I did my first show with him. The first thing that struck me about Glenn was he had an earring in his right ear, which back then meant you were gay, so I didn't want to get too close to him. I was the musician of the bunch. They were all into football and shit like that, so I wasn't involved in those conversations. All right, pausing again. He's kind of obsessed with people being gay around him and not wanting them to be close to him. He's one of those religious guys. He has a story. I mean, the London Dungeon story. He wants everyone to know that one of the cops that tries to interrogate him in London when they're locked up, looked like a real gay guy, real Peter Noone. I think Noonan, Noone. I don't know who that is. He's an actor. Other than that, I don't have that reference point in my head visually, but and the cop asked him, Bobby Steele, if he was gay because you wore leather pants. And he's like, why would you want to know? And then he says the cop beat the shit out of him. So, all right. Calm down, dude. I say this because, if it was a Bobby Steele biography or autobiography that went on for 1,000 pages and he mentioned gay people or that he thought someone was gay 3-4 times, I don't think that would raise an eyebrow. But I've only got so many quotes from the guy based on the fact that a lot of us want to know as much as we can figure out about the Misfits, and he's obsessed with letting us know how he feels about gay people, and he wears a Jesus Beat the Devil shirt. Anyway, more Christian weirdness coming up with members of the Misfits later. And I don't mean Christianity in and of itself, or Christians listening to this should think I'm attacking them. I just mean some weirdness that could only happen in a Christian form on the next episode of the Misfits in the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. Because I'm going to get into the stuff they did when they were trying to sue Glenn, and I'm going to get into the stuff that they recorded before they had the Misfits 95 and onward band together. Woo, buddy. Woo, buddy. All right, back to Bobby Steele. I also don't want to downplay the whole football player aspect, because, you know, Jerry and Doyle were huge dudes that were athletic, you know, and yeah, they're into sports. That's some of their, what they love. There's just so much backbiting in the Misfits. There's parts of their history where Glenn makes it very clear why he hates other people in the band because of what they liked. And here's Bobby Steele making it clear he doesn't like Jerry because Jerry likes football, and he's not going to even have a conversation about it, right? So fucking important when you're young. And if that's how he presented it, I would say, yeah, of course. A lot of us were like that, you know, very tribalistic and defensive and not want to take part in things that remind us of people we don't like. But I mean, this is way later. This is not an interview from 1981, okay? He's not saying, oh, it's so silly how we are when we're young, isn't it? I didn't want to talk to him because of football. You know, I've grown up now, and I understand the world does contain football and contain myself, and I can live with that. Despite all this, he does say they got along well in the beginning. They put up posters together all over New York, and then go back to Jerry's house and hang out, and make huge ice cream sundaes. Apparently, he wants to stress that Jerry was a rich kid. His father had a few manufacturing businesses, and one that was the sort of bootleg version of X-Acto knives, which, you know, it comes up a lot in the stories about the band. That's why they had a solid financial foundation. Jerry and Doyle's dad had a lot of money, and they used that to do what they did. And that will be a factor later in the whole legal disputes, the whole history of legal disputes with this band. You know, they put up a lot of the seed money to get this going. And when you're in a band, no one treats that like a real business. And they don't treat it like a real business years later either. If there's not a paper trail and contracts and all those things to sort of present in court, and there's not an LLC or a corporation people can sort of point back to and go, oh, yeah, you deserve this money because of the things that you did. At the same time, one could say that Jerry only overreached a lot in what he wanted as compensation for his time in the Misfits compared to Glenn Danzig's writing. Again, more on that later. Now, the Bobby Steele era is like 79 and 1980. They would play for a few months at Max's Kansas City in New York and get more well-known in Manhattan. Here's a great note. 2 days after the Jonestown massacre, the new lineup first gigged there, opening for Trixie Sly. This is the words of Stephen Blush. They threw buckets of grape Kool-Aid on an unsuspecting audience. Very timely. Very culturally relevant, then. If you don't know, look up Jonestown Massacre, and you'll discover where the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid comes from, or I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid, or I feel like these people around me have been drinking the Kool-Aid. I don't want to take any of that shit for granted anymore because I'm so fucking old, and that was an old reference when I was young. Also, for all Glenn's talk later in this episode about the Whiskey A Go-Go show and how he believes Rick James stole a bunch from the Misfits and Motley Crue stole a bunch from the Misfits, I think this incident probably would have inspired, I don't know, the Insane Clown Posse a little bit, maybe, with like Faygo soda pops being spewed all over their audiences. I'm not a historian when it comes to the ICP. Don't come after me. I don't know when they started doing it or if they even give any props to the Misfits ever, but they have to be influenced by the Misfits. Look at those guys, crying out loud. Also not saying whether that's a good or bad thing. That's up to you, folks. So don't come after me, Misfits fans. No, he's not. They suck. Misfits, nothing to do with them. So when Bobby Steele joins the band, the drummer at the time is a guy named Joe Poole. He's from New Jersey. He spent a lot of his days working around the area, in this case at a racetrack, which is funny because Jerry Only and Doyle's dad actually had like a horse breeding business or a racehorse business as well. Not sure if he was hanging around a car race track or a bicycle racetrack or a horse racetrack, but I'm going to assume as the son of a thoroughbred horse trainer, since it's New Jersey, it's probably a horse racetrack. Betting, gambling, those kinds of things. He met the Misfits at a studio, actually, when they were kind of asking people in the place if they were percussionists, if they were drummers, because they were looking for somebody. A place in Manhattan called Libra Studios. And he was down for playing with whoever. So 1 week later, he goes to the Jerry Only Family Garage for an audition, and they were impressed with what he could do. He liked the material himself, so he accepted the offer to join the band, and he wanted to change his name to Joey Pills. But I guess they thought he would sound cooler if his name was Joey Image. Final decision on what's cooler, up to you, my listener. Up to you. But boy, was he not in favor of Bobby Steele joining the band. Back in 1993, he told Ugly Things, I just didn't dig the way he played from the get-go. He had a twang in his guitar. He just wasn't good for the band, but Glenn thought he was all right. It was Glenn and Jerry's band. I was a part of it, but it seemed they made all the decisions and shit. Well, the twanginess, I think, doesn't serve the Misfits later when they want to get heavier and punkier in a more hardcore way. But at this time, for the more atmospheric stuff, as well as the, down-picking fast punk stuff, I'm sure Bobby Steele's guitar tone and his playing style was a really nice sort of mid-ground. Obviously, you wouldn't want that guy on Earth AD. But for being the guy live to translate the work of Franche Coma from the Static Age, CI Studios recording sessions, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name of that guitarist, Franche Coma. My apologies to your family and anyone I have disrespected. A certain kind of twang in the guitar tone is sort of necessary. I know on the recordings, yes, it's super fuzzy. I get it, but there's a strong bass guitar element that has a gronky sound to it. And some songs are less fuzzy, overdriven than others. They have a little high end, top end to the sort of guitar approach for a little more atmosphere. I'm saying not a bad thing to have during those years. That year, I guess. Maybe a year and a half tops. I don't know. When you're presenting that album live. I'm a guitar guy, and I guess that's part of my bias, is it's not so much about playing a guitar exactly the way it was played on a record as it is presenting it live with the right kind of vibe to it. And I think for the Static Age era Misfits, if you want the opposite of a twangy sounding punk guitar, you can certainly go to the 1990s version of Misfits and see how you like that, motherfucker. Sorry, I'm super opinionated about that too. Doyle always sounds like he's just plugged into a Digitech metal pedal of some kind, plugged directly into a mixing board. And that holds for when I saw them live about 2 years ago at White River Amphitheater. That holds for the Danzig Legacy shows where he's jamming with Tommy Victor and in a semi-acoustic, no drums really happening kind of a session in front of a small audience. God damn, what a missed opportunity that was. Jesus balls. Yeah, so if you've listened to a lot of episodes of this podcast up until now, you might be noticing I'm a little more opinionated and a little more biased about this band than I am about, let's say, Jerry Lee Lewis or Janis Joplin or, other subjects of this series, because there's a lot of turnover in this band. There's a lot of shitty backbiting and bad attitudes and crankiness, and I love all their music from the initial era of Misfits stuff from the 70s and early 80s. And hey, if you don't like this much of my attitude, pun intended, you can go listen to another prominent podcast that just covers the Misfits and only the Misfits. I tried to listen to one of their episodes about the arrest of the Misfits in Louisiana, in New Orleans, in a graveyard. And you know what? The two fellas that do that show, I mean, they seem to be really cool. They seem to be nice. They seem to be connected into the whole world of Misfits lore. But they got a lot of episodes to crank out over a long period of time, man. And you don't get to do that with just straight up information, and just historical knowledge all the time. They got to start out talking about their weekend and how long it takes to drive to Colorado Springs. Like, if you don't like my podcast, go check them out. Oh, they have a long review of like their favorite beers that week. And they say that, this episode, unlike previous Misfits episodes of our Misfitsy podcast, we actually had to do some some research and not just rely on our own feelings and how we interpret the events in the Misfits timeline. So if I'm not scholarly enough, go check that out. That's what smart people do. They create something sustainable. I'm not smart. I get super obsessed and overly energetic about too many details, and I constantly feel like I'm not doing enough to give you anyone. I was going to say give you, but I'm just doing this for myself mostly to get all this out of my head and justify my own existence, to give somebody something to learn from and listen to. Not the kind of person that is clever enough to go, all right, we're going to have this much padding and this much filler, and we're going to assume the audience likes us as people. And that's going to carry us through most of the episode. And then we'll talk about a couple of details. I'm not just talking about this podcast either. There's some live streaming sons of bitches that are just reading straight from Misfit Central on their live stream, and then it just sort of taking you down a road in their mind of what they think is in the heads of all the Misfits at the time. And now a message from our sponsor, Nobody. Now, if you're just a Misfits fan, not a huge fan of the whole history of rock and roll, I assume this is probably your first episode or entry point into the history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll, as I have chosen to call it, and you may call it what you like. Even if you were familiar with how I do things normally, today's episode would be another exception. A little weirder. I'm packing a lot of extra stuff in for Halloween. So, as I mentioned at the top, we're going to talk to my friend Joe Moore a little bit. I've broken that conversation for this episode up into just three-minute chunks, and I'm going to use a lot more of that horror movie conversation for later episodes, probably the next one with the Misfits, probably some more horror-themed episodes later. But we're also going to delve into the history of the band Fear. Not extensively. That's what, would happen on a normal podcast. Like, the people that were in the band Fear met each other in 12th grade, and they tried to steal a car from their superintendent or something. And then they go from there, and they had this many records that they made and this many lineup changes. I'm just focusing on Halloween and their Halloween appearance on Saturday Night Live today. So let's jump into some Fear conversation. We're going to get into the Joe Moore conversation about his horror movie marathon when I met him many years ago and became friends with him. And we're going to get into this also the film Teenagers from Outer Space on this episode. And then we're going to blend that in with more conversation about the Misfits before we're done. We got some stuff to talk about when it comes to hanging out with Henry Rollins and playing the Whiskey Go-Go, maybe or maybe not getting into a scrap with Motley Crue, or maybe just a person in Motley Crue, or maybe none of that actually really happened. We'll examine it from all angles that we can, similar to what we're going to do with the whole story about Fear playing SNL on Halloween. First, let's talk to Joe for a few minutes, and then we'll blend in the Fear story. We'll blend in the movie. We'll blend in more of the Fear story and Joe and Misfits.
Because it's Halloween, I've just thought, why not talk to the Halloween legend, Joe Moore, who changed my view on what was potentially doable for a horror movie marathon. And let me set the scene of oh my God, there you go. That's
Good.
the guys that those are the guys in was it Pittsburgh or
Philly.
Yeah, Philadelphia. So you live let's say back in, I'm guessing it was around 2005. You were living in Pennsylvania were you in Jersey at that time?
Yeah, we were in Jersey. Your show
Yeah.
was in Trenton, the state capital, beautiful state capital of New Jersey, and we lived in Ewing, which is like the next town over.
So you had like an all weekend marathon set up, and you had printouts on the walls of what movies going live at what time. There was a very clear plan for who would have to flip the DVDs out and put in the new ones at what time and who's taking what shift. Meanwhile, your friends are over like barbecuing at various times, drinking in the kitchen, hanging out, mixing cocktails, cracking open beers. I couldn't fathom having that many friends that would come over for a horror marathon, let alone 2.5 days, or just like having that many friends that would want to party. Like me and the guys in Los Burbanks were friendly. We had a great time being in a band together, but
you guys ruled. You guys were so awesome. You were the perfect band.
Yeah.
To come and to be at our house for that event, like
it was a blast, but we didn't have like a party house is what I'm saying. Like the two guys in the band, the rhythm section, with including the singer, Herman was a bass player and singer. John was a drummer. They had an apartment together when I met them here in like the suburbs of Seattle, and it was tiny, and they were sharing it with the other guitarist that I was sort of taking the place of. And I also had shared an apartment with two of my best friends across town in South Seattle. And, we couldn't have fathomed like what a cool setup that would be. And then to like utilize it so well, like you guys had plenty of couch space and floor space and bedroom space and kitchen space. And it was just like a dream come true to me, to like, oh my God, what a wonderful life. And I also I don't want to gloss over the fact that you guys, like there was a precedent setting series of events for this. This was maybe this was the first horror movie marathon, but you guys had wacky hijinks on the weekends that you talked about when it came to like in high school. Even you had an exercise where, okay, this Friday we all, and let me run through it, and then you correct the parts that I get wrong. But my memory is you're like, okay, you and your two buddies or three buddies would basically finish out the school day, let's say 3:00 or whatever the hell it was. You get to have a small amount of cash in your pockets. Maybe it was $5 at the most. Maybe it was 2 quarters at the most. You get to choose 2 items to take with you on your weekend. You can't drive. You can't go home.
Yeah.
The bottom line was the school bell would ring. You would all meet in like the courtyard in front of the school, shake hands and say goodbye, and then go off on adventures and show up Monday morning in time for class without being late, with the same clothes on and no transportation of your own. You just had to basically like go off on an adventure, see where you could hitchhike or like bum a ride or go into the woods and like camp out and see what you could accomplish and what other supplies you could gain along the way due to just your own ingenuity and charm and charisma.
Are you ready for more spooky Halloweeny things? I hope so. Let's talk about fear. Fear, the band, I mean. Let's go back to your regular narrator for a spooky book he's got open in front of him right now. Live from New York, the complete uncensored history of Saturday Night Live by James Andrew Miller and Tom Shales. Here's a quote from Dick Ebersol. John Belushi had become convinced that Fear, which was this punk rock kind of group, were on the verge of breaking out and convinced me that I ought to book them and personally vouched that they were terrific and so on. Anyway, their musical number in the last 15 or 20 minutes of the show was so dark. They had films in it showing pumpkins that as you carved the pumpkins, blood came out of each carving. It was just like O'Donohue at his darkest. Pause for your narrator to interject. Michael O'Donohue was a founding cast member and writer of SNL, as he was also a founder of the National Lampoon team that took the National Lampoon sort of brand out of being a Harvard newspaper and into national consciousness as a magazine, as well as the sketches they did for audio and the radio hour, quote unquote. The guy was really twisted, had some amazingly jarring twists and turns in his humor. A lot of very absurd and violent sort of ideas, like instead of doing an impression of a famous singer, he would only do the impression of that person with needles getting jabbed into their eyes, things like that. Check out, if you can, A Stupid and Futile Gesture, the documentary. It's available on streaming. No, I take it back. That's the dramatization. It's also excellent because Thomas Lennon plays Michael O'Donohue. The non-dramatized version, the straight-up documentary, is called Drunk, Stoned, Brilliant, Dead. Anyway, back to the text. And I, quite frankly, had given him too much freedom. I think he means O'Donohue, so he's trying not to repeat that again. But now here I am with Fear itself. We're on the air, and all of a sudden, they're out of control, and there are dancers around them, including John Belushi, who you can't see on television, and they're slam dancing, which is what it was called, banging off each other, banging into the audience, banging into cameramen. None of this was really foreseen, and things got really, completely, and totally out of hand. And you're sitting at home, and you're watching this, and you don't really have the total sense of what we could see. Because Davey Wilson in the booth was not shooting what was breaking out in the lower areas of the audience where people sit on those movable chairs. And I think probably for the only time in the history of the show, I have been worried about it enough to have told Davey to at least have a film standing by. It was a sensational film that had aired in the first show 4 weeks before on October 3rd. And I assume he means the first show of the season, because this is like season 7 or something crazy like that. When I looked it up on Google today, we're talking 81. So season 1, as I look at a DVD case from the library, is 1975. So yeah, somewhere around the 7th season. So they roll footage that's been already aired at the beginning of this season during Fear's performance. It was a sensational film that had aired in the first show 4 weeks before on October 3rd, with Eddie playing a black inmate. This is the Eddie Murphy era, who wrote poetry in iambic pentameter or something like that. It was a takeoff on whoever Norman Mailer loved at the time, who was a wronged guy in prison and a wonderful piece of character. And so I told them to roll it. And so we just rolled the film. We let Fear finish in the studio, and I don't think they knew until they were back in their dressing room that the last half of their song had gone away. Anyway, the total damage that was done in the studio was about $2,500. But the New York Post headline on Monday was, Saturday Night Live riot destroys $250,000. Stephen Blush writes about Fear in American Hardcore, A Tribal History.
The first group to generate a hardcore style vibe at their live shows was Fear from LA. Fronted by Lee Ving, a nasty fuck who went out of his way to insult everybody, Fear did rude tunes like I Don't Care About You and Let's Have a War. Their early shows saw incredible violence, due in large part to their popularity with suburban surf jock types. Fear earned infamy for their role in Penelope Spheeris' cult film The Decline of Western Civilization, police crackdowns at their gigs, and their controversial 81 spot on Saturday Night Live. Critics allege that Fear dabbled with right-wing lyrics, symbols, and slogans. The fact is that Ving, a foul-mouthed fucker, simply wanted to offend everyone. Lee Ving says, "There really never was a point where my life took an extreme right-hand turn or change of direction. It was a gradual onslaught. I liked the idea of there being no rules. Coupled with that, I wanted to find the best players I could. They called us musos because we knew how to play." The author goes on to say that Fear made national headlines in 1980 when bassist Durf Scratch spent 4 days in Canoga Park Hospital with a shattered face, the result of a severe beating from a few surf jock fans after he spit in one's face. That happened right around the premiere of The Decline, chronicling the violence of the proto-hardcore scene. Radio ad spots blurted, "See it in the theater where you can't get hurt." Lee says, Durf had some difficulties with some people during the course of the evening and wound up having some surgery over it. Needless to say, it became very expensive. We had a benefit for him and everything. He got in a fight with one person, but that person had a glint in his eye that should tell most people to find someone else to fight with. Mike Watt of the Minutemen says, "We played the Starwood with Black Flag, Fear, and Circle Jerks. Durf from Fear was a great bass player, and the drummer, Spit, could nail a dude at 100 feet. So this 6'8" jock grabbed him and pounded him. They put a picture of him in Rolling Stone. Remember him all beat up with the drainage cup on the side of his head? That's from that fucking gig. You got to watch out who you're spitting on." King Coffee of the Butthole Surfers says, "When I saw that Rolling Stone with a picture of Durf with a drainage cup attached to his head, I thought he looked really cool. Rolling Stone tried to act all horrified, but I was wishing I was there." In the Misfits biography, This Music Leaves Stains, James Green Jr. wants to dispel a long-standing rumor that is totally untrue that Fear were part of the bill at a gig at the Elite Club where Misfits got into fistfights with crowd members who were hucking unopened beer cans at them. I presume these were cans that were sold by the venue without opening them first. Maybe that's why my whole life that's been a policy at every bar I've ever been to, that they open it for you. Whether it's a bottle or a can, I don't know if that's what if the whole hardcore punk scene was the historical precedent that changed that policy in bars all across the country. But let's see. He talks about the fact that the rumor of them being there, though, is reasonable considering the general time frame and Fear's reputation for being present at or even directly responsible via their fierce crowd baiting for outbreaks of untamed punk rock violence. Desjardins, who personally booked the evening acts, said Fear was absolutely not there and were never even considered for the show. A freak appearance by Fear on NBC's Saturday Night Live approximately 6 months earlier at the behest of superfan John Belushi, wherein the destructive actions of Fear and their cadre of slam dancers is said to have caused several $1,000s worth of damage to famed Studio 8H, had increased the group's concert draw to the degree they could no longer be considered an opening act. As Fear drummer Spit Sticks put it years later, explaining the SNL effect, "We were industry mud for about a year, but we were kings on the street." But what's funny is that there is a bit of a Fear Misfits connection around the SNL appearance. Let's see. In Going Underground, American Punk, 79 to 89, George Hurachala says, during the original band's 3-show process of elimination tour, now I'm talking about Negative Approach, not Fear, not the Misfits, but it leads into that. 81 with the Meatmen and Necros, New York, Boston, and DC. Negative Approach got to know the DC punks and happened to be in New York at the same time for the infamous Halloween performance of Fear on Saturday Night Live. Necros was in town the day before, playing the Ukrainian Hall with the Misfits. So a lot of the Midwest crew was along. The way it came about was somewhat surreal. Ian MacKaye, and I pronounce it that way because Henry Rollins pronounces it that way, Ian MacKaye was woken up by a phone call one morning by Lorne Michaels from SNL, who said he got his number from John Belushi. At that point, Belushi got on the phone to tell Ian that in turn, he got his number from Decline of Western Civilization director Penelope Spheris, who said the DC kids were great at, quote, punk rock dancing, unquote. Belushi had only agreed to appear in a cameo on the, at that point, poorly rated SNL to get his friends in Fear on it. And the band wanted some kids thrashing around at the show. The password onto the set for everyone was Ian MacKaye. The combined forces of Midwest, DC, and New York punks thrashing throughout the chaotic set was not something that anyone on SNL was prepared for, though to their credit, Fear was not fazed in the least by punks bouncing off them continuously as they performed on national television for the first time. It was what they wanted. While John Brannon was hanging out with other punks in the green room before the set, John Belushi told Brannon that he should get a mohawk. And then Belushi picked up some clippers and gave him one. At the end of New York's All Right, if you like saxophones, when the microphone got knocked down, Ian MacKaye was crouched over the stage like, New York sucks, into it when the newly mohawked Brannon grabbed it from him and yelled, negative approach is going to fuck you up, for the benefit of the national audience, causing the show's producers to freak out. They immediately cut to tape of the sound check when Fear was doing Let's Start a War and faded out from there. This show caused hysterical headlines in the New York Post about an out-of-control riot on the set of SNL. Supposedly, $200,000 in damage was caused by the DC punks, and staff members talked about fearing for their lives. When Billboard magazine looked into the story, they found that no damage had been done at all, according to SNL producers, and most of the Post story was fabrications. A surprised Lee Ving, who was unaware of any controversy until being read the Post story, commented, in point of fact, nobody was hurt and nothing was smashed. All that happened was that a plug got pulled out and a Halloween pumpkin was destroyed. John Joseph of the Cro-Mags has his own bizarrely colorful memory, even more purple than that of the New York Post, of enormous vandalism, fights, rioting, an all-out pumpkin war, and a variety of other things no one but him seems to recall. As DC scene member Tom Berard remembers, he had got one of the dollars the dress-wearing Fear guitarist handed out between songs with the line, will you be my friend, I'll give you $1. The massive pumpkin on stage was smashed by perpetual troublemaker Billy McKenzie from DC, and they all slid around in the mess of it afterwards. For the love of everything fun, if you haven't seen the footage, please look up the footage. It's all over YouTube now. You can watch it pretty easily. And it's a sight to behold. People just going bonkers, you know, jumping all over the stage while the band plays. You know, Mike's stand getting knocked down while Lee Ving is singing. It's somehow ending up back in his face through some magic or other. And the cameras, when you see it on YouTube, the cameras aren't cutting. You know, it's one shot for the most part, at least what I've seen. And everyone in it is amazing. Donald Pleasance's intro is very, very worrisome. I don't know if he thinks he's being ironic by pretending to be scared or if he's really scared, or I don't know. I think it's a hybrid of the two, quite frankly. When he introduces the band, he's like, he keeps saying how nice they are. Ha 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 ha. But happy Halloween, everyone. Here is Fear. It's great. I'm not used to seeing him not perfectly under control, whether he's the Birdman in The Great Escape or whether he's Dr. Loomis in the Halloween films. I know he's done a million other things. I know he's an amazing actor, but those are the two that stick with me the most.
Hey, here's an exciting, fun Misfits fact. 500 copies of the Cough Cool were originally pressed by the Misfits, released on Blank Records, their own label. More on the significance of that name on the next episode. But on the back cover of the single's sleeve, Glenn Danzig mistakenly spelled Jerry's last name not Caiafa, but Caifa, C-A-I-F-A. As a result of this, he demanded to be billed forevermore as Jerry, only Jerry. So Danzig obliged on all future printings of his name, Jerry only. Careful what you wish for.
So yeah, that you're talking about the survival weekend. Now that happened, I think 1 or maybe 2 times. There were things kind of like that I didn't actually do. I wasn't in that, but my friend Terrence did it.
Mhm.
I would think I was just like too young. I knew them. We were friends.
Yeah.
There were like 6 people that did that, and it was the survival weekend where they left school on Friday, and they could bring, I think it was $5 in steak quarters. It had to specifically be steak
So
quarters
specific.
and 1 luxury item.
That was it. One luxury item. So like it could be like a Swiss Army knife, but it couldn't be more money or something like that.
Yeah, but I think the luxury items tended to be like, my one friend brought a book of poetry. My other friend, the 2 friends who went together, brought like bowler hats, like plastic bowler hats. So they were just kind of like silly. Stuff. But we were in high school in a really, really rural part of New Jersey, so you kind of had to make your own fun, and that's what we did. And we did a bunch of weird shit like that.
Yeah.
So we got this house. There were 4 of us, and really the 3 of us. Terrence is the guy who owns all the DVDs. Me and Eric were the ones, and Mark was around for some of it, but I think he had to leave for a while. He wasn't as committed to the movie stuff as we were. No offense, Mark. But we would, in high school, Terrence was a collector of films and movies, and he had a bunch of physical media. So we would just go over his house. And the first marathon was the George Romero Dead movies.
Sure.
And we just went over, and we weren't planning on it, but we watched Night of the Living Dead. Then we did Dawn of the Dead. Then we did Day of the Dead. And at that point, it was like 2 a.m. And I drove everybody to ShopRite, which was 24 hours. It was like 20 minutes away because it's super rural, half an hour away. So we drove there at like 2 a.m. and bought supplies to make egg sandwiches. And I brought them back, made egg sandwiches for everybody. And at like 3:30, 4 a.m, we hit play on, I think Land of the Dead had been out at that point.
That's, I love all those movies, but that's the last one I saw.
Yeah.
I think that was it. The John Leguizamo and Des Hopper one.
Yeah, I saw some of Diary of the Dead, which I think was the one that was like on the island, kind of shot like a found footage thing, or maybe that's just the credit scene.
I think that was the point of it. It was like a found footagey kind of thing, like a video.
That was what was going on then. George Romero was like, "Yeah, we're doing it."
Yep.
Right, let's talk a little bit about Teenagers from Outer Space, because I could not find a movie called Teenagers from Mars. I'll assume Glenn took the inspiration for the title as maybe a mashup between Teenagers from Outer Space, Grave Robbers from Outer Space, and various films ending with the words "from Mars" that he probably saw many, many times on the television or in theaters. This is a movie that came out in about 1959, which I think that just puts it like a year after Green Hell. Not going back to check. It was an indie film, another black and white sort of sci-fi, supposedly, but it, pretty good for a sci-fi horror, I think, from that era that actually delivers on some action. I don't think it's a great movie, but if you're curious about it, there is a Mystery Science Theater episode you can see that probably won't ever be taken down or pulled. Mystery Science Theater, for those of you that don't know, they have lots of issues from year to year when it comes to the rights of those movies and the ability to reproduce physical media or streaming media of them making fun of them, because someone usually does own the rights at various times and wants money for that kind of thing. Because in 1987, the studio that did own the rights, Warner Brothers, failed to renew its copyright registration. In the 28th year after its publication, it became public domain. So there you go. Feel free to enjoy watching a little bit of that on your own time. It, as I say, it does deliver on some action. Like, it's got a real pissed off
antagonist going all around this small town and just zapping people with a ray gun that that according to the poster, these are thrill-crazed space kids blasting the flesh off humans. It's technically true. You don't see any flesh being blasted. You just like zap and there's a flash of light and then all of a sudden there's a plastic skeleton laying there. But it is pretty funny and pretty cool. I also would say there's a couple of nice looking Wormers in bathing suits as well. And a great shot where he zaps a good looking Wormer in the bathing suit in her pool with his ray gun. And the whole thing like bubbles and steams and smokes while it happens. And it looks great. A lot of good, angry supposedly teenager. Obviously, he looks closer to his 20s, like all the quote unquote teenagers from outer space do in this film. Being a real dick. Like you can see how someone like Danzig would watch this movie and just go, that's the guy I want to be, not the hero. The hero is a total simp. He comes to Earth and he tries to integrate into society to rebel against his home planet and leave it all behind, leave their whole society behind, and tries to get with a gal. And then by the end of it, tries to make the ultimate sacrifice to save, the citizens of Earth. And he bites it, which lends a little bit of poetry to his declaration when he told the young woman that he had come to Earth never, ever to leave for the rest of his life. But in reality, by the end of the movie, he is determined to go back to his home planet and be with his family again. But the guy, his name is Thor. The character's name is Thor, played by Bryan Grant. He's a badass. He just does what probably any 50s teenager would love to do, is just go tear-assing around this town, just mouthing off to authority figures and killing them, just murdering any adult that gets in his way for any reason. What teenage kid wouldn't love that? Well-adjusted ones, I'm sure, yes. And you do get a bit of the giant bug action here, the late 50s giant bug monster thing. They look like lobsters, lobstrosities, if you will. The, what are they called? The gargons are their sort of livestock from back home. When it was initially released, Teenagers from Outer Space was set as a part of a double bill with Gigantus the Fire Monster, which is just the English dubbed version of 1955's Godzilla Raids Again. What a time to be alive. One critique at the time was from the LA Times, stating, "What a curious little film this is. There are flashes of astonishing sensitivity half buried in the mass of tritisms." And of the director, Tom Graeff, Graeff, they said, "When he stops spreading himself so incredibly thin, I think his work will bear watching." Well, unfortunately, he didn't stop spreading himself so unbearably thin. He, after this film failed at the box office, suffered a nervous breakdown in the fall of 1959 and proclaimed himself the second coming of Christ. Soon after this time, he was arrested for interrupting a church service with some sort of display of wackiness, I can only assume, and departed Hollywood in 1964, never to be seen there again. He committed suicide in 1970, unfortunately. But on the subject of him spreading himself thin making the movie, there was a lot of interesting cost-cutting measures taken, somewhat inventive, some that didn't really pan out too well, like the clearly labeled multi-channel mixer MCM2 that was used as alien equipment, a atomic disintegrator toy ray gun was used as their main weapon in this, and they used just a mirror flash to create the effect of it happening on a larger level, whatever light was emitted from this toy gun for kids, apparently.
You are not familiar with the focusing disintegrator ray? It projects an isolated beam which separates the molecules of living material in chain reaction.
And of course, you get your very, very liberal use of stock footage and stock music. Same tracks were recycled for other films like Red Zone Cuba, The Killer Shrews, and Night of the Living Dead. Now, I was looking up the cast of this, and I had to check in on one actor in particular, the space captain of the aliens. His name is King Moody. And I was like, well, that has to be someone worth looking up and finding out more about. Yeah, he didn't really do much after, the late 80s and early 90s. He just was a character actor that made little appearances on stuff like Night Court and Quantum Leap, 30-something. And before that, he, was in the TV movie called Get Smart Again in 89. I guess that was sort of like a reboot of, not reboot, but like a sequel to Get Smart sort of thing for people that remember the show. Because he was, I guess, regular on that in the late 60s. He was also someone who appeared in stuff like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Good Guys, Dragnet, Doris Day Show, Bob Newhart Show, McMillan and Wife, Starsky and Hutch. I'm sure a lot of these are just like one-off things, but around 1969, he took on the role of Ronald McDonald in what IMDb calls a TV series short titled McDonaldland. He played Ronald McDonald from that time through 1985. Now, somehow, television commercials for poisonous children's food are labeled a TV series short in IMDb. But don't worry, I'm not crazy. I'm just, I just think McDonald's sucks in particular. I love cheeseburgers. Now, I mean, he was in a million of these things, and I don't know how much he got paid for any of that stuff, but apparently it's enough for him to not take other jobs, at least not to get a regular gig anywhere else. Now, why do I care about that? Well, because I looked at who else starred alongside him during these times, and I see from 71 all the way up, well, maybe not all of them, but 101 episodes from 71 to 2009 show on IMDb that the Grimace character was played by Frank Welker. And who's Frank Welker, you ask? Well, God damn it, he's Megatron from Transformers. Like all of them, I think, or all the important ones, like the ones I know from being a kid. And then the crappy Michael Bay films that people love. And a lot of other series in the Transformers canon in between, as well as a lot of G.I. Joe and Scooby-Doo stuff. He was in the Transformers movie, of course, as Megatron, Soundwave, and Rumble, and then Galvatron in the later series episodes where, of course, they're not going to get Leonard Nimoy to do that cartoon voice after the movie's over. He's got to go do that unexplained phenomena show, Seeking Answers, or a current mystery of what's out there, whatever it was called in the 80s. He had weird voices in 80s movies like House 2, The Second Story, and one of my favorites as a kid, The Golden Child. Aren't you happy you know this stuff now? I bet you are. You can just look him up on IMDb. Frank Welker, Welker. Not a person who was in Teenagers from Outer Space, but I'm just fascinated to see how deep the man's body of work actually goes. Son of a bitch, he was the gopher in Caddyshack 2. Isn't that great?
Thank the Lord you're safe. I just came from Alice's. There was a skeleton in the pool.
Oh, no!
Oh, sorry. You mean that was not just a skeleton floating in a pool randomly? That was actually your best friend who lived in the house with the pool? That's what that was? Gosh. perspectives on the Fear appearance on SNL are featured in American Hardcore by Stephen Blush. And I'll read directly from the people themselves. Stephen's intro to this part, called Media Blitz, begins with a bit about Quincy. And then later in this chapter, they talk about, Penelope Spheeris's decline of Western civilization. We are going to have to do a Penelope Spheeris episode for sure in the future. But for now, I'll center in on the section about SNL, where Stephen Blush says, Fear's November 81 appearance on Saturday Night Live constituted a major milestone in hardcore's rise. The show made national headlines after a horde of hardcore kids invited by John Belushi trashed the studio. For years, that was the only episode NBC never re-aired. Belushi hung around with Fear frontman Lee Ving and attended many of Fear's shows. And his last notable act was hooking up that event. He OD'd a few weeks later at LA's Chateau Marmont. Lee Ving says, our appearance on Saturday Night Live took place because John Belushi was a big fan and good friend to the band. The people in charge of the show thought they wanted some sort of crazy shit on the air. Judging by what went down, I don't think they knew what they were getting themselves involved in. The rest is history, so you've got to give credit to Belushi for helping put this music on the map. Ian MacKay, Minor Threat, says, Penelope Spheeris told John Belushi about us. That's how we ended up being on Saturday Night Live. Belushi had left the show, but Saturday Night Live asked him to do a cameo. He said he'd come if they'd let Fear be the band. Then he was talking to Penelope and said, I want to have people dancing. And she said, the only real punks I ever met outside of LA are from DC. So he got my number. Producer Lorne Michaels called me and put John Belushi on the phone. He said, I want you to come and show these people what it's all about. So 30 kids from Washington came up. We weren't even big fans of Fear. They were kind of a joke band. But the idea of it was so funny. We just thought, we'll fuck shit up. We were into representing, but it was met with complete hatred. John Joseph of the Cro-Mag says Lee Ving was buddies with Belushi and hooked up all the DC kids. They kept us in this room for the first set. Then on the second set, we went down. At the first note, I was like the first one to dive off the stage. We just wrecked all the equipment. This big fight broke out between us from New York and the DC kids, which I didn't want to get involved with because those guys were my friends too. Also, it was funny. It was Halloween and everyone had pumpkins. So we all started throwing pumpkins at the NBC officials, who then called the cops on us and cleared us out. Ian MacKay said on the mic, New York sucks. That's when they cut it off the air. There was something in the newspaper about $250,000 worth of studio equipment that got destroyed, cameras and all kinds of shit. I mean, we went crazy, and it was funny because at the end of the show, both the DC and New York crews ran out laughing together. Barry Hensler from the Necros says, Michael O'Donoghue called Ian MacKay. I want you to bring a bunch of your neo-Nazi friends up to New York. So we went to see Fear on Saturday Night Live and fucked up a camera. We were all escorted out of the building. The next day, the New York Post said we did $100,000 of damage. The funniest thing was someone gave John Brannon a mohawk. So there was all this hair all over the green room. We were walking to the NBC studios and we found a huge bag of 45s in the garbage. There were spaces between the tiles of the ceiling in the green room, so we covered the entire ceiling with these records. The TV people were really freaked out. The woman came in and got really wide-eyed and ran out. I don't know who the woman is he's referring to, but okay, whatever. The hair was cleaned up, the records were pulled down, and when she came back with her boss, it was all clean and we were drinking Pepsis. Then we went and slam danced. The damage ended up being a $3 wiring job because someone knocked a camera over. Ian said, New York sucks on the mic. Brandon said, negative approach is going to fuck you up. And it got on the air. It was cool. Tom Berard from the DC scene said the password to get into NB Studios was Ian MacKay. They put us in the green room, which overlooked the stage. The show started. We went down and started to slam dance. It got out of hand. Our friend Billy McKenzie grabbed a huge Halloween pumpkin and smashed it on stage, all sorts of shit. In the next day's paper were headlines of $100,000 of damage, which was misleading. What it meant was a $100,000 camera almost got broken. Ving recounts some of his own recollections of the whole incident with SNL on an interview you can see on YouTube called When Fear Destroyed SNL on the Lip TV, whatever that is. And they say that Fear was banned from the airwaves, which is definitely not true. They were not banned from the airwaves. They were banned from coming back to SNL, like lots of people were, for lots of reasons. There's lots of bands that never got the chance to come back to SNL. Does not mean they were banned from the airwaves, you dicks. Anyways, he says that, you know, they show up at the Four Seasons Hotel, which is where they're being put up, thanks to SNL, probably thanks to John Belushi. And they walk in, you know, looking like punks. He said, you know, the girls got huge holes in their stockings and not wearing bras. And we walk straight up to the, you know, front desk and say, hey, we're Fear. We're playing SNL and we're staying here. You know, got to find out where your room is. And the person at the desk is like, oh, will you be staying with us one night, sir? It's like, oh, no, we're here all week. I don't actually know how long they stayed. I do know that he claims after they played SNL, he gets a phone call in his hotel room from the New York Post. And the New York Post says, we understand that you just caused $10,000 worth of damage to the studio at Rockefeller Center. To which Ving replies, that's a bold-faced lie. We're professionals. We cost $400,000 worth of damage. I counted it myself. Now, I know it sounds like I've told the same story multiple times, and I have, because the numbers are different depending on who's telling the story. And I felt like that was necessary, especially when we're talking adjunctly about the Misfits, or adjacently, or peripherally. No, it's more than peripherally. I'm going to say adjunctly. I'm going to say that's a word I just innovented to steal from the great Jack Donaghy. But it's an event that happened and it was televised in 1981. We're not talking about, you know, the Battle of Gettysburg here. Okay. This just goes to show how many different people can interpret the same exact events differently, depending on who they were, where they were, what they were under the influence of, and what they want journalists to think or people writing a book to think. Now, if you are like me and your introduction to Fear songs was through metal bands, yes, I am not hardcore, not even in an ECW sense. I am terribly unhardcore in that regard. I was introduced to I Love Living in the City by Fear through a cover by Stormtroopers of Death on their 1991 Live at Budokan record album and VHS cassette. I loved it. Later I heard Let's Have a War. Later I heard I Don't Care About You. Later I heard New York's Alright If You Like Saxophones. I highly recommend all those, and including, you know, one of the other songs they played on SNL, Beef Bologna. Lots of fun there. If you've never heard them and you don't think you like a lot of hardcore punk, maybe start with those songs. That's sort of my recommendation based on my experience. That's all I can do. I can just say that I love their attitude and style and athleticism on their instruments and their just shit-eating sense of humor and their willingness to berate their own audience and try to provoke them to physically attack the band. Having said that, if you'd like to see that sort of thing happen, feel free to check out the footage from Decline of Western Civilization by Penelope Spheris. Their segment is the sort of like they're the last band in the whole documentary, and it's something to behold, to say the least. Not for the faint of heart. There is a segment where they're telling some really bad, dirty jokes. I mean, bad as in provocative and mean-spirited and not tasteful or clever at all. Heavens to Betsy. There's a heckler in the crowd, a female voice that blows the punchline of each one of the jokes before the punchline is delivered, as if the crowd has heard this so many times, someone there already knows it. Penelope Spheris, the filmmaker herself, admits in the commentary on the, more recent edition of the DVD with her commentary on it, that the female voice there was ADR. It was a friend of hers, someone I'm not familiar with, but someone involved in, I guess, the whole scene. And she's just recording after the fact, after the footage has been processed and edited. She's just saying the punchline, so you can carry him around like a 6-pack in the microphone, in a microphone in a recording studio. Didn't actually happen in the crowd. What does happen in the crowd, to tie it all together, tying it all back together, what you do see in the footage in the crowd is a close-up of Robo, who, of course, is a big factor in the Misfits story. He's laughing and reacting, supposedly, to the jokes while waiting for the punchline. I don't know if that happened in real time or if that was just a good reaction shot that Penelope Spheris edited into this jokey segment. But he's there in the crowd, sort of smiling and throwing his head back and reacting favorably to these crass jokes. And then the band, does a lot of great, fun, wacky stuff. Like, trying to throw a woman off the stage or kick a woman off the stage that keeps trying to get up to leaving, and asking them to like them by throwing money. Real money, Leaving says. This is real money. If you'll like us, please like us, out into the crowd. They'll insult the crowd, and then they'll tell the crowd, no, we're just kidding. We love you a lot. We're so glad to be here. We're from San Francisco. Not for everybody, but if you're listening to a podcast about Misfits, I assume you're not the most uptight person in the world.
Oh, those wacky fellows in fear. Now, let's get back to more talk about the Misfits. I should also get back to Bobby Steele and mention that his name, now that I've brought up Mr. Joey Pills, his name came from the fact that he had a metal leg brace he wore as a child to help with spina bifida, and also some adolescent bouts of polio and a spinal cord tumor as well. So he had to walk with a cane quite often from his teenage years on. His real name is Robert Kaufhold, which does not sound as cool as Bobby Steele, quite frankly. Now, it's not as all-consumingly badass as Zach Wilde, another New Jersey guy. There's something about Jersey guys and their need to have very edgy names in rock and roll, right? And actually, that leads me to something else. New Jersey guys, what is it with you and wanting to sound like you're from the South? Bruce Springsteen, John Bon Jovi, Glenn Danzig, and the aforementioned Zach, Z-A-K-K, Wilde, W-Y-L-D-E, all come from New Jersey and all try very hard to sound like they're from Tupelo, Mississippi at various points in their careers. In some cases, a large part of their careers. What's in the water there? Someone call in and tell me, please, for crying out loud. What is it that makes you do that? I also want to mention that Bobby Steele had been in a whole lot of bands before this, so he's no joker. He's no dingbat. He didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday. He was in a band called The Living End. And then he was in a band called Parotox, P-A-R-R-O-T-O-X, which, noted by James Green Jr. in This Music Leaves Stains, The Complete Story of the Misfits, that Parotox counted among its ranks Smithereens bassist Mike Massaros and future developer of the game Mortal Kombat, Bill Pidgeon, P-I-D-G-E-O-N. He had also been playing in a band called the Whorelords, W-H, in 1978, when he placed an ad in a New Jersey music trade paper, The Aquarian, looking for an established act to join that already had management and a record deal.
Glenn Danzig sees the ad, and despite the Misfits not really having either of those things going for them, responded. Now, I know I've been jumping around a lot in the Bobby Steele timeline, but I felt it was necessary to go back to the beginning a little bit, and then we're going to go move forward to the infamous UK tour with the Damned. In June of 1979, the Damned played with Misfits at Harrah's in New York City. I guess Iggy Pop was there. Debbie Harry was there. I'm sure a lot of other really great, wonderful people were there. But Jerry Only has a chit chat with David Vanian and the managers of the Damned after the show, and suggests the Misfits support the Damned on a tour in England that fall. Now, this is June, so fall is like 30 days, 60 days away. The folks in the Damned didn't really put anything on the books, apparently, after that conversation. They got their asses back to the UK and got on with their lives. But supposedly, Jerry Only took that conversation as a binding contract, albeit a verbal one. And it took longer than the fall. It was like 6 months later, on November 21st, the Misfits got their asses on a plane and flew out to the UK on, Jerry Only's dad's dime for the beginning of what they thought was going to be a tour with the Damned. Well, that little month excursion was quite a flop and was disastrous on many, many levels. Except for songwriting and life experience, I suppose. Damned weren't expecting them to show up. They were not prepared to have to put up the Misfits and, let them stay with them or find them places to stay or pay them money. They had an opening act for that part of their own, slew of dates called Victim for, I guess it was 6 days around Britain. The management for the Damned did add the Misfits to that bill. It was awkward, though. It was very tense. Members of the Damned and their entourage made no bones about not being very predisposed to liking the Misfits or wanting to hang out with them or support them or give them any sort of help at all. Also, as far as they were concerned, the Misfits were not owed any money. If they were going to tack themselves on the tour, they get some exposure, whatever, fine. They would, the Damned felt like they were doing them a favor by probably, squeezing them in at the last minute and getting other people to agree to put Misfits on the bill. Misfits were pretty cranky about the gear they had to play through. They found it to be substandard. Joey Image himself said his drum kit was the rinkiest, dinkiest he'd ever seen. They definitely felt disrespected, and I think this probably just comes down to Jerry Only being the guy in charge, saying there's a deal, they get out there, there's no deal. This is not the kind of thing, evidently, he followed up on to make sure was, on anyone's books. He just said it was going to happen, so let's just contact the musicians union over there in England, and someone's going to have to pay us. I'm also assuming he was of the mindset of well, no one can get pissed at me if we're the victim, right? I'm taking a leap here, knowing what I know about human beings and being in bands with people, because he's a very organized and motivated and driven guy. So it sounds kind of like a bit of a a bit of a grift. He's working an angle. He's like, I don't know, guys. When they get out there, I don't know. They told me that we were going to open for Damned. I talked to him backstage. People party backstage. They do lots of drugs. Then they get on an airplane. They fly back home. They don't remember who you are or what that conversation was. Or they think the other person made the deal and probably wrote something down. They don't know what's going on when you just show up from America, evidently. I have yet to read much on, the Damned's side of things. But the Damned as a band are a bunch of backstabbing, throw you under the bussers. They don't like each other either. I mean, more so than, the Misfits are up there in bands that were together for a while, but didn't like each other and tried to screw each other over. The Damned made an even longer career out of it. They're even more professional about it. So I'm equally willing to entertain the idea that the Damned did know that the Misfits, these aw shucks, Americans from New Jersey, had their heads full of ideas about how great it was going to be if when they came over to the UK to play with a band like the Damned, and they said, "Yeah, let's just hang them out there to dry and see what happens. Who gives a fuck? That'll be fun." I don't know. I would love to watch a movie about either one of those perspectives, quite frankly. If nothing else, watch the Damned in their own documentary, "Don't You Wish We Were Dead," for the moment where on a recent tour at a meet and greet event, David Vanian decides he's just not going to show up. So they notice a kid in line to get their autograph that looks awful lot like David, and just brings him over to the table to sign other people's autographs. Because he was essentially cosplaying as David Vanian. Now, according to the notes in Stephen Blush's American Hardcore about this little episode, the tour with the Damned in the fall of '79 lasted all of one show. Glenn and Jerry, according to him, booked it through the Musicians Union, receiving contracts from the Damned's manager outlining the pay for each gig. So it was a different, sort of slant to this telling of the tale. They got nothing for the first date, literally because Jerry never signed the papers. They probably could have worked it out, but inner turmoil erupted and Joey Image left. Bobby Steele goes on to talk about how Joey quit the band while they were in London, got up one morning and went home. We were supposed to play with the Damned at the Rainbow Theater. Joey just got fed up and left, so we couldn't. We tried to pick up a drummer there because there was a chance we might get on a Clash tour. I guess in the This Music Leaves Stains book, there was a mysterious, shadowy figure named Derek who approached the Misfits and saying, "If you stay here a little while longer, I'll get you on a tour with the Clash or some shows of the Clash." And then he disappeared, and no one knows who he was or where he went. And the next part of the book is both Bobby Steele and Jerry only talking trash about Joey because he has a heroin problem and exposing some of the trauma that he's had in his life that might have led to addiction and drug abuse in their minds, yada, yada, yada. You can read all that for yourself. But Jerry only does this maneuver that manipulative people do when they're, writing their history or rewriting someone else's history. He talks about how, they were talking to someone at CBS about putting us on a world tour with the Clash. Joey got on a plane and split before we could do the audition, which was another turning point in the band, he says. I wasn't trying to straighten him out. I just wanted to get rid of him. Okay, so you wanted to get rid of him, but you also wanted to audition for the Clash because they decided you were good enough to go on a world tour with them. All right, Jerry. Bobby Steele goes on to talk about, the fact that in his opinion, they shouldn't have walked off the tour. But he was outnumbered by Glenn and Jerry, and obviously, Joey had already left, so it's 2 against 1. He says he tried to reason with them. He tried to express the point of view that, look, if they could do the tour, they'll have the union behind them. Jerry's got the money to subsidize it if they're losing it at the time. But, everyone was so pissed at each other. The Rainbow Theater gig just didn't happen. And I don't know. Bobby seems like the most level-headed at this point about the fact that, look, if we could have put something together, we could have blown people away at that Rainbow Theater gig. We could have been a bigger band. We could have sold more records at that time, Everyone in Misfits, in their own way, seems like the most level-headed member of the band when they're telling the story from their point of view about a certain couple of events. Except Jerry Only. Jerry Only says, when the Damned's manager refused to pay us $100 a night, I told him to forget it. He said, "What are you guys, nuts? Anybody would give their right arm to open for the Damned." I said, "Fuck you. I fly my whole band out here, and you can't give me $100 a night?" We were being exploited. They were turning the PA down. They wouldn't let us use their equipment, and they rented us real shit gear. They were trying to make us look like jerks so they looked better. I felt that keeping face and walking off the tour was more important than exposure. I don't know, Jerry. I think if you could have whooped some ass through bad gear and a a lower volume PA, people would have remembered you as a pretty formidable force. Whatever. Not saying he's wrong with his feelings, though. I mean, bands did that all the time. Bands would screw over the openers. They would. It's a common theme for years and years and years. It's 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. I've seen it happen to lots of bands myself. As far as like the PA not sounding good until the headliner goes on stage, that kind of thing is common practice. Not that I like it. If you listen to the AC/DC episodes that I did, that was one of the nice exceptions. They didn't care. They were like, fine, bring it. We're fucking AC/DC. Do whatever you want. We'll give you every advantage we can. Tear the place up, please. Those dudes went on after Metallica. Jesus Christ. Didn't give a shit. Anyways, back to the misfits that are trapped in London now with nothing to do. American Hardcore has a 1 page long Bobby Steele account of what happened with the cops in London. I won't read that. I won't use that. It's just another one of those. It's like reading Rex Brown's autobiography about Pantera. Like Bobby Steele always sounds like he's the badass and everyone else sucks and everyone else is a pussy compared to him. Like the kind of guy that would be in his 60s by now and be wearing an edgy looking T-shirt that says Jesus beat the devil in interviews. But I will, I hope I come across like someone that's kind of even-handed. I will give him, what I think is the benefit of the doubt a lot of times, but he's like, a lot of guys in this story about the Misfits. I don't always trust him. I don't always take what he says to heart. It's his point of view, and I don't feel like always entertaining his point of view. I mean, I've barely entertained Glenn Danzig's point of view throughout this whole episode, but also, I feel like a lot of us have had about 40 years of Glenn Danzig's point of view, okay? And I like that guy's work a lot. But I think there's a bias towards Bobby in American Hardcore. It flat out says, like, he was the most punk rock of all of them, and the other guys couldn't handle it, in the narrative of Stephen Blush's book. Evidently, there was some sort of conflict with some skinheads outside the Rainbow Theater the night that the Jam was playing on the 2nd of December. And Bobby was kind of catching up with Glenn after having not seen him for a little bit that night. And, he had gone to get some fish and chips to eat. But, Glenn was like, he had a broken bottle and was like trying to sharp pieces of glass to fight with some guys that he felt were conspiring against him. I haven't really seen a blow-by-blow account of what supposedly happened that brought the cops there. There is another account that it wasn't a broken bottle. It was a piece of glass from a broken window nearby. I'm sure for some people that's very important information. The general story is Danzig and Bobby were both arrested outside the venue. Bobby's story is more detailed, but he also says he was doing, lots of mandrax while drinking booze. And he talks about how he was grabbed by security and Glenn was grabbed by security, but they let Bobby go because they said he was cool. And then the cops came and Glenn got arrested. I mean, most accounts say Glenn and Bobby were arrested. Bobby's account is, like I said, I'm not going to do it word for word. You can buy the book and read it or ask him on YouTube. But his whole thing was like, he went to the station to go get Glenn because, Glenn had all the money for them that they were, going to use like a per diem or something or whatever they had to live on that day, that week. And Bobby had none of it. So he wasn't going to let Glenn rot in jail. Bobby's whole plan is if they don't let him get some money from Glenn, he's going to just piss off the cops so much that they lock him up too with Glenn. And that's I guess what happened. There was a police summons to the effect of, on Sunday, the 2nd of December, at Hornsby Road, N7, using threatening behavior, whereby a breach of the peace may have been occasioned, citing to Section 54B, Metropolitan Police Act, 1839. And they were in jail for 2 nights in Brixton. Bobby says London Nudgin was his idea. Whatever, Glenn wrote it. And then they went in front of the magistrates on magistrates court on the 3rd, and then were released on the 4th. I don't know if there was bail money. I don't know if they had to pay a fine or anything, or if they just had nothing on them, so they let them go. It seems to me that in comparison to a lot of American cops, you know, when it comes to stories of musicians in bands, you know, getting arrested, they can kind of yank you off the street for a lot less in the UK. but it doesn't seem like there's this long drawn out process of keeping you for months if you can't pay your bail. They got in front of a magistrate like the next day or 2 days later. So, and then I guess then they got on a plane and they went home. The end of the UK tour. If you're a legal scholar and you want to correct me on any of those details, please call in now. Otherwise, the end. So the Misfits go home pretty dejected. They had funded that trip on, I guess, Jerry Only's dad's American Express card. Obviously, they had no drummer. They had scheduled a release for a 12-inch EP called Beware, and it was, you know, supposed to be a promo release for the Tour of England. It came out in January 1980, so, you know, about a month after the non-tour didn't happen. And then they had a 4-month break. They had no drummer. They had no shows. They finally got Arthur Googie from New York City. Evidently, Arthur had never been in a band before, and this was his first. And this all crosses over back into the Hits from Hell conversation that we, you know, got into earlier in this episode. So that is the point today where I'm going to leave off on the Misfits talk. I've basically taken us through a big chunk of starting with Doyle joining the band, going backwards to the guitarist before him, well, not all, but a lot of the big points that ensued. Not so much that I wanted it to be a guitar-centric conversation, but if you just focus on, you know, that transition, then you get all the extra stuff in the middle, who came and went, and where did they go, and how did they get from New Jersey to the UK, even though it was a disaster, yada, yada, yada. I didn't say anything much about the beginning of the Misfits or the end of the Misfits. So guess what we're going to do next time? Yes, we're going to get into more of the origins and more of the various endings of the Misfits. I'm not going to do a definitive breakdown of their post-Danzig stuff. You could find all that on misfitscentral.com. And I'm sure, like, Fiendcast has tons of conversations about that you can listen to. I know they have a billion episodes, and I know a lot of them from sifting through the titles do have a lot to do with every era of Misfits history. So, and they've been at it for a few years, so you're bound to find a lot of great conversations there about that. Not to mention all the other stuff that they've talked about. That's not that later Misfits years. Now, prepare yourself for what comes next.
So anyway, in between that period where Terrence he wasn't going to college with me, and he had stopped going to the school that he was going to, he spent 6 months working full-time, 40 hours a week, living at home.
Okay.
And I remember going up and visiting him and him saying, Joe, I could literally take my next paycheck, cash it in $1 bills, put it on my front lawn and shit on it. I have no need for money. I'm at home. They're not charging him rent. He's eating, you know, like, and he's working 40 hours a week, making good money. Okay. So he spent like almost all of his income from those 6 months on DVDs, Blu-ray. So by the time he came to college and moved into that house with us, I mean, like, his room looked like a video store. Like, it looked like an insane video store, like just stacks and stacks. He's kept it up. Mm-hmm. You know, I was at his house like 2 or 3 weeks ago for a little marathon. And I mean, like, up to your waist around his room. Yeah. Like, all the walls are all DVDs.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So that was, you know, and I think it was, so we had done zombie movie marathons. We would do Western marathons when we were in high school and occasionally in college when we'd get together. And then someone like joked like Terrence had enough to do a 3-day marathon, or Terrence decided he did. So he printed up the schedule, put it all together, and then that was right. It was right before Halloween. It was October or something when you guys were in town.
Yep. And it was laid out in terms of franchises, and it was laid out in order of per franchise, depending on what was going to go live at what time. I recall specifically late the night we were there, I think seeing Demons 2. I believe it's Demons 2, not Night of the Demons 2. I remember motorcycles. I remember it being Italian in nature somehow. And I think I slept a few hours and got up the next morning, and I got to see the mid to late Frankenstein franchise on the American side of things. Like I got to see, I believe it was House of Frankenstein and Curse of Frankenstein. I got to see for the first time ever Bela Lugosi go from playing Igor to playing Dr. Frankenstein. I think almost back to back, if I remember right. Which is funny. Like I was reminded of that listening to a Gilbert Gottfried podcast. I was like, oh shit, that's right. Like he was made up to be like Igor at one point for, and then he got to play, or we got to play the monster. That's what it was. He was Igor, and then he was the monster, not Igor, and then the doctor. I think.
There you go. See, Ed, that's a great inspirational tale for anyone.
Take the guy that turned down Frankenstein eventually got to play like the 5th and 6th installments of the sequels after the Hays Code had ruined all the fun.
Yeah.
Which is nothing I remember learning that recently. Like I didn't get why there were so many sequels to the Universal monster films that were lame, that don't have a lot of love. And also, I think as you told me on the phone, like, a lot of those great directors and actors were moved on to other things. So they couldn't do sequels to those franchises. They didn't even have the same monster person necessarily. It was like, but I was telling friends of mine just 2 days ago, like the Hays Code came in, and all of a sudden, you may not realize it, back in the 20s and part of the 30s, there were like depictions of lesbianism. There were mentions of having to get an abortion. There were things that like had to be stamped out for modern mainstream consumption. And they got a lot less sexy, and they got a lot less violent in the horror movie genre very quickly. So it's like, Creature from the Black Lagoon's great. Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein's great. Dracula's great. Whatever. But then you start getting further down. You get like 7-10 years into that, and it's just very bland. And it's not lost on me that like the Abbott and Costello movie is heralded as one of the best examples of a good horror movie with those characters, because it was, it kind of made up for some of the blandness and the boringness.
Yeah. I mean, and I think too, like the problem I think with the franchises is that it's commerce, right? Like after the first one's a hit, it's not about the art. And maybe we're changing that a little bit now. You see with the reboots that feel a little bit more like, fans are making these movies. So there is that sense of like, we need to be careful with this material. But I think back then the studios were like, man, crank out Creature from the Black Lagoon 2 as fast as we can.
Yeah.
We're going to start shooting before it's done written, because we got to get this out there to get that money.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the reasons, but I mean, you're absolutely right by all the other ones. You lose the actors, you lose the writers and stuff. They're working on other things. I think that's even back then. And I'm not a film historian, but I believe the actors had contracts with the studios.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you weren't really like shopping around for roles, or it wasn't that, it was just like, they told you like, all right, get in this suit. And
this is yeah. This is before agents kind of took over, and like very lawyers and stuff, and before anyone knew what to do with these people. Like there was stage acting, and then there was film all of a sudden, and it's like, how do you
and movies just were consumed so differently then. Like they weren't caring about anyone watching this at home. Like they were thinking it
was physically impossible.
Yeah, who are making out or whatever. We want to give them something creepy. We're going to do a triple feature or whatever, and we need a third movie. So just get it done, get it out there. But
Now let's get into the Whiskey A Go-Go saga. Let's get into Henry Rollins and Vince Neil. Shall we? If you've listened to my podcast before, you might know that I like to read criticisms and write-ups of artists at the time of their existence, way more so than the retrospective bullshit that people have the luxury of writing after years and years and years of someone else doing all the research for them. I think it's important to understand how these artists were perceived in their time. So let's talk about the April 15, 1982 issue of the Los Angeles Herald Examiner music review titled "Misfits Make a Joke of Hardcore Punk." Just so you know, kids, clickbait existed from the beginning of the established press. Not a new thing. Look up a guy named William Randolph Hearst. The guy used the newspapers just to make wars happen whenever he wanted to, if he, or at least he tried. Anyways, this is by David Shute from Herald Examiner in LA. He says, "The Misfits, a flamboyant foursome from New York who growled their way through a tight and infectious set at the Whiskey on Tuesday." See, he's being complimentary. Like either he or his editor decided to put an inflammatory, a headline in there to make you go, "What? What got here? Oh, I'm going to read this and be angry." Or if you don't care for hardcore punk, you'll read it and go, "Ooh, I bet, there's some nice boys in hardcore punk. Maybe I should pay attention." They make the morbid nihilism of hardcore punk seem playful and ingratiating. Mind you, the obligatory buzzsaw drone of noise and rage the band churns out doesn't sound ironic. But since both the costumes of the players and the lyrics of their best songs, costumes of the players, not attire, not, clothing. But also, he's saying costumes, but he's not like couching this in like the history of performers before them, like Screaming Jay Hawkins or something. Anyways, sorry, back to it. The costumes of the players and the lyrics of their best songs as he sees them, are borrowed from the grisliest schlock horror movies. The boyish dress-up games and gleeful gross-outs suggest a refreshing, larkish attitude toward the standard pose of hardcore. What's more, the Misfits material has a strong spine of musicianship that one doesn't pick up on right away. You have to play their fine first album, Misfits, Walk Among Us, Ruby, Plan 9, a couple of times or give them at least 50 minutes in concert before the melodic undertow of their music comes into focus. In other words, it's at exactly the point where most hardcore bands would begin to seem tiresome and repetitious, because raw anger wears out its welcome quickly, that the Misfits begin to get interesting. They aren't trying to get on by rage alone, but display an authentic commitment to showmanship. When Misfits mastermind and lead singer Glenn Danzig declares that screechy tunes such as Astro Zombies or Night of the Living Dead are really heartfelt metaphors, "Everybody's a horror for me," Danzig said, we should probably take that claim with a grain of salt. But for me, it's precisely this grain of salt that gives the music a special savor. In a pinch, for instance, you might be able to argue that a Misfits song like Violent World, about an actual infamous magazine that at one brief low point in the late 70s peddled graphic photos of train wrecks and executions. Narrators laugh. In the era of beheading videos and YouTube. They had it so easy back in those days. You might be able, let's see. Sorry, I got off track. Represents an authentic nightmare vision, that's in quotes, of modern life. But most of their numbers can only be interpreted as sick jokes. Mommy, Can I Go Out and Kill Tonight, for example, recalls the gruesome family vignettes of Charles Adams. Side note, if you haven't read any Charles Adams stuff, I can't say stop this listening experience now and run out and buy all of his stuff, but please get around to buying all of his stuff. It's so wonderful. The creator of the Addams Family was a cartoonist, a black and white cartoonist. Oh, I guess some of it was in color, but Edward Gorey, Gorey. Look up Edward Gorey ABCs and look up Charles Addams cartoons on Google image searches, please, 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 please. while Brain Eaters has all the lip-smacking grossness of a ghoulish playground chant. Brains for dinner, brains for lunch, brains for breakfast, brains for brunch. Why can't we have a change of pace? Why can't we have some guts? The Misfits' rave up at the whiskey did not, unless my ears deceive me, include the lustful album cut Vampira, but the spirit of that slinky TV shock theater host from the 50s, the Elvira of her day and a star from Plan 9 from Outer Space, from which the Misfits' home label, Plan 9 Records, takes its name, lingers on in the band's tacky, macabre trappings. The rotting letters of the Misfits logo, for instance, are copied from famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, the Bible of every horror-loving 10-year-old. On the surface, the Misfits resemble both the Cramps and the earlier, funnier incarnations of the Plasmatics in exploiting the fondness of the punk audience for cheesy, gory horror pictures. But it's crucial that the Misfits look like pretend zombies. They aren't wasted, spindly, real-life zombies like some punk performers. Under the black leather graveyard togs and the white makeup, the Misfits have bodybuilder physiques, and the music, which has a core of muscular craftsmanship, matches their looks. In one form or another, the Misfits have been around since 1977, producing 5 EPs and a single, and have always had a loyal cult following. But the release of Misfits Walk Among Us seems to signal their real arrival. Sorry, he keeps printing it all as one title, Misfits Walk Among Us. The word is out, apparently, because Tuesday night's crowd included Black Flag's lead singer Henry Rollins, we'll get to him in a bit, who granted the Misfits in LA punk seal of approval by joining them on stage for final song. Should be for one final song, I guess, or their final song. And punk funk superstar Rick James, Super Freak, was included in the crowd, is what he's saying. Hardcore punk, no matter how much longer the diehard fans hang on, has just about exhausted its potential as a pop music subgenre. Ugh, what a gross sentence. What a gross self-important sentence. I'm this cranky. I'm sorry. This gentleman is being very complimentary and very respectful and not inaccurate about the Misfits, and I still read stuff like that and go, ew. It's that music journalist tendency to want to dictate the timeline of things that haven't happened yet that always gives me douche chills. Anyway, let's see. I apologize for saying anyway so often. I'm still trying to stop myself. Sure, an occasional hardcore band like the Bad Brains can briefly restore the music's angry, scary conviction. But the range of hardcore music is very narrow, and by now, the same seething chords and phrases have been repeated so often that they seem faintly ludicrous. Like Black Flag, however, the Misfits have found a way out of the hardcore dead end. They have turned the silliness of the hardcore pose into a joke that they share with the audience. I don't know if the bands or the musicians themselves would say that, buddy. I don't know that they would say that to their friends and their peers in the scene, but you got to do your thing, I suppose. The opening act substitute, Saccharine Trust, whose underwhelming SST EP is called Pagamicons, maybe, I don't know, plays hardcore dirges with lyrics that sound like a pretentious high school student's notion of avant-garde poetry. Drunk on the rug, stuck in the blood, he vomits nostalgia. Those are quotes from Saccharine Trust's lyrics, I guess. So I presume he was given a free single or something from SST to look at the lyrics. What a nice, respectful, but still fuddy-duddy kind of breakdown. Let's go then from that to a fanzine produced at the time called We Got Power. I believe it was around from 81 to 82. I'm going to include a link to it in the description from a blogspot.com article from 2010. And it has an image of Saccharine Trust's SST-006 release, Paganicons. So either the misspelling was in the Herald Examiner or was in Misfits Central, because that's clearly easier to pronounce. If you choose not to read it all squished together, it's pagan icons. I don't know. I wasn't there. But in this fanzine, there's a fun little interview with Glenn Danzig and Arthur Googie by I assume, the creators of the fanzine, the main editors and writers. It says, the Misfits were interviewed at Rachel's house after their April 13th whiskey show. Dave, Rue, and Jordan talked mostly with singer Glenn Danzig, Doyle, guitar, and Googie, drums, were also present at times. Dave, I wanted to ask the bass player why he smashed up his bass on stage because he's not here. Glenn, because he's fucking cool. He said it didn't work, so he fucked it up. Rue, can you compare the New York scene to the way it is here, like with the cops, etc.? Glenn, cops are cool in New York. They know that they got better things to do than be bothering little kids. They're assholes here.
And the kids would crack a few heads if they knew it was good for them.
They should just take the cops and beat the shit out of them. If the cops got guns, they should get guns because it's ridiculous here. It's more than just harassment. You should take the cops out and shoot them around here. Jordan, is there a good scene in New York? Glenn, now there is. It died for a while because people were watering it down with, there's an F word there, spelled Faggy, disco and new wave shit. Sorry, self-censoring. Sorry, I'm going to have this on YouTube. So, Dave, what LA bands do you like? Glenn, Black Flag. Rue, that's it? That's all that appeals to you? Glenn, that's it. Black Flag. Jordan, what kind of people go to your gigs? Like, are they punks or paying customers? Or Glenn, punks? What do you mean, are they punks? Rue, Glenn, try to lower yourself to our level, please. Dave, yeah, we're kind of stupid. Glenn, well, do you mean trendy mohawk people or people in leather jackets or skins? We got everything. LA isn't the only place with people who are into punk music. That's another thing I don't like about LA. They think they got the market cornered on punk. We had 1,000 people at our last New York show. Rue, is Washington, D.C. happening? Glenn, no, not anymore. Maybe now that Minor Threat's back together, it will be. When they broke up, the DC scene sort of fizzled. It was real good, but the Midwest scene's the best. Better than LA or New York, Detroit especially. Jordan, so when are you coming back to LA? Glenn, in June or July. Rue, have you ever played LA before? Glenn, no. They wouldn't let us last time. We played at the Nest and a couple of gigs in Frisco in November. We tried to get some dates in LA, but they told us we were too violent, too loud, too fast, and there'd be all sorts of fights. Oh, excuse me, there'd be lots of fights. Slash got us a show at the Whiskey. That's the only reason we got it, because of Slash. Narrator's note, he's not referring to the guitarist from Guns N' Roses, obviously not in 1982. It's a magazine. Googie, Arthur Googie, the drummer from Misfits, entering room. So, like, what kind of magazine is this? Dave, a really good fanzine. Glenn, tell your readers to send us all their skulls. Any skulls you got, we collect them. If your baby brother dies, just cut off his head and send it to us. I collect horror movies, too. Shit like that. Horror posters. I like blood. Dave, what about your name, The Misfits? Do you think that fits in with the skulls and all? Glenn, I think it's a great name. I don't care if it fits in or not. What do I care? If you don't like it, don't come see us. Don't buy our records. What do we care? But you will, because you'll love us. Dave, tell us about the Fiend Club. Glenn, it's a fan club. It's basically so we can get feedback from our fans, and we send them free shit. Whenever new buttons or pictures come out, we mail them for free. They can order t-shirts through us for $5 instead of $10. Print our new address. Printed below. Misfits Fiend Club, P.O. Box 3112, Grand Central Station, New York, New York, 10163. Dave, what's the radio scene like in New York? Do you get airplay? Glenn, yeah. Timmy Summers has a hardcore show. He always plays us. There's a new afternoon show on right before that on Wednesdays. Rue, what other New York bands get airplay? Glenn, he plays a lot of British stuff lately, but some good New York bands are Reagan Youth and Kraut. That's about it. By the way, Reagan Youth will be familiar to listeners of this podcast if they checked out the Airheads commentary. That is a convoluted story, my friends. If you don't have time to listen to the Airheads commentary, skip toward like the last 40 minutes of that episode, maybe. Listen to it. Figure it out yourself. That's about it. The Beastie Boys were good, but they broke up. What? That's a story for someone else on another day, on another podcast, I suppose. But they broke up. I don't like New York bands that say American music sucks. The British are more emotional, more into what they're doing. I hate British bands. There's more talent in 1 acre of America than there is in all of fucking Britain. Dave, it's kind of ironic how the LA Oi scene really seems to like you guys a lot. And you're definitely American. They hate every LA band. Glenn, do they like Black Flag? Rue, they despise Black Flag. Googie, they're assholes then. Besides us, Black Flag's the best band in America. Glenn, Oi is all right. It's just like everybody singing along and shit. I'm into sing-alongs. Besides me having a good time on stage, I want other people to have a good time too. The end. So now let's talk Black Flag. Let's talk Motley Crue. Let's talk whiskey in April 82. I didn't do that rhyming on purpose. But there's a little bit of fun, funky mystery here. For me, and I'm sure a couple other people that like Misfits stuff, and I'm willing to bet the kind of hardcore people that were there at the time, supposedly, that would hear me explain the next part and go, "You don't even know what you're talking about. I was there. I know exactly what happened," aren't the people that are listening to podcasts about this stuff by somebody 20 years too young to have been there. So I guess call in if you know the real story about what I'm about to talk about. Now, for most of us, youngerns, late to the party in the 90s who were getting the Misfits box set for the first time when it came out, we read Eerie Vaughn's liner notes. And that was our first introduction to this particular legendary interaction. Eerie says, Walk Among Us came out in 82, mine and Doyle's senior year in high school. 13 classic songs, all of the elements were there. The hooks, the catchy melodies, grade B horror movie titles, the big choruses, the eighth note down strumming barrage, tons of photos, some of mine were used, so I was thrilled. And a lyric sheet that let you in on the twisted vision that hid within Glenn's mind. Upon that release, the band did a national tour that took them out to sunny California. There they met horror film star Vampira, for whom they named a song. She was living in seclusion and hadn't made a public appearance in many years. She was so moved by the band's musical tribute that she met with them publicly and posed for pictures. Before a scheduled Whiskey A Go-Go gig, here we go, Glenn said the band and Henry Rollins, then with Black Flag, chased some Sunset Strip cock rock band named Motley Crue down the street. The shows at the Whiskey were recorded for what would be a special gift for the Fiend Club members. Now, Misfits Central timeline of the Misfits, it says on 4/13/82, before the Misfits show at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles, the band allegedly chased the members of Motley Crue, as documented by Eerie Vaughn in the Misfits box set liner notes, down the street. According to Henry Rollins, Motley Crue vocalist Vince Neil walked into the bar while the Misfits were doing their sound check, and Jerry, Doyle, and Danzig began heckling him from the stage. At that point, Neil supposedly turned and ran out the door. The scheduled opening band, the Flesh Eaters, were replaced by Saccharine Trust. Both Earl Liberty from Saccharine Trust and Rollins, who provided guest vocals on Bullet that night, appear on the covers of Evil Live 7-inch EP in a photograph taken that night. Also in attendance for the Misfits set was Rick James. The show was recorded on soundboard audio. After the show, We Got Power, see issue 3, interviewed Danzig and Googie. Obviously, that's what I was reading from earlier. Now, in an interview with Glenn Danzig from exclaim.ca, an article called Glenn Danzig, Legacy of Brutality, Glenn talks about that night and the show before that, arrival in LA up in San Francisco, when the crowd were throwing things at the band. One fan in particular targets Doyle with beer cans, and Arthur Googie and Rhodey Rocky, only in Doyle's brother, jump into the crowd. Doyle accidentally hits the fan, and breaks a guitar over his head, which incites a riot. Glenn tells Seconds, all these people were getting hit with bottles and beer cans. These kids had singled out Doyle and were hitting him with full beer cans. Finally, Googie jumped into the audience in the middle of a song and started a fight with one of the guys throwing beer cans at him. It was a big fight. Googie started getting his ass kicked, and Doyle saw one guy throwing beer and hit him in the head with his guitar. It just went crazy after that. A riot, basically. I remember when Maximum Rock and Roll did their story. It was a one-sided, and everybody wanted the Misfits gone, but that's bullshit because a lot of people had come there to see the Misfits play. Article then goes on to say, before a gig at the Whiskey A Go-Go in L.A., Motley Crue's Vince Neil walks in during sound check wearing loads of makeup. The band began making fun of him, and it's later alleged that Glenn and friend Henry Rollins, who performs with the band later that night, chased Neil outside and down the Sunset Strip. Glenn later confirms to Seconds that it wasn't down the street, but we ran them out of the Whiskey when the Misfits first played there. It happened, and it was pretty funny. You know, Motley Crue got a lot from the Misfits. So did Rick James. Up until then, Motley Crue was a Dolls imitation. New York Dolls is what he's referencing, if anyone doesn't know. And then all of a sudden, they were into the Mark of the Beast. Interesting accusations there. I don't know. Do you? No, I don't think you do. I don't think we're going to know. I don't think we can really qualify or quantify how much Rick James supposedly ripped off the Misfits. I don't know how much you can sort of figure out how much Motley Crue supposedly ripped off the Misfits. Maybe Wasp was already doing something before that. Maybe I'm wrong. But back to the point of this is the conflicting tiny little details about the whole Motley Crue, or was it just Vince Neil, confrontation with the Misfits, or was it just Henry Rollins and Glenn Danzig, or was it just members of the Misfits from the stage and not Henry Rollins? Well, some of you may or may not know, Henry Rollins published a very authoritative book on these years and his activities during these years while he was in Black Flag. It's called Henry Rollins, Get in the Van, On the Road with Black Flag, right? Came out around the same time as the Misfits box set, quite funny enough. I was going to say quite frankly, but I don't, quite frankly doesn't make sense. It's a timeline thing, Jay. It's not open to interpretation. So let's see. I went through his book, and I think I got every mention of the Misfits tagged and bookmarked. And let's check it out. Let's just check out all the entries. All right. 23rd of, what is this? We're talking 1981, and it is November. And it says 19th and 20th, San Francisco, California. We got to the MAB, and I went to the dressing room and tried to find a place to sleep for a little while before sound check. I heard a Misfits song seeping in from the club upstairs. I figured that someone was playing a tape through the sound system. The song came to an end, and then I heard someone tuning up. Okay, some band playing a Misfits song at their sound check. The band played another Misfits song, and then another one. I walked up there to watch this band that seemed so bent on playing Misfits covers. I came through the door and looked at the stage. It was the Misfits. I didn't know they were playing that night. I only knew one person that had seen them play, as they usually only played on Halloween. I recognized Glenn Danzig immediately. It was amazing to hear them live after years of playing the singles endlessly. They all came up to the edge of the stage and shook my hand. They were great people. They asked me what song I wanted to hear, and I asked them to play Horror Business, and they did. Later on that night, they played their set. Luckily for me, they went on before we did, and I got to see the whole thing. They were great. Walking into the on Broadway in the late afternoon and encountering them will be something I'll never forget. Okay, then there's a chunk of pages that says, UK tour. They're not official entries like the other one as far as how they're laid out. They're just sort of pieced together, I think, from scraps and Henry's memory. Goes on for quite a few pages, and then it gets to 23rd in New York, when they get back from the UK, and then the 25th in Passaic, New Jersey after that. And this is barely more than a month later. He says, we were in New York City hanging out. They had just lost their drummer, and they had Bill from the Descendants fly out to New York City to play with them. No rehearsal. He just knew he was good enough to know the songs. I think we're staying in the place where the Bad Brains had recorded their ROIR sessions. The Necros were in town, and they told us they were going to Lodi, New Jersey to hang out with the Misfits and play with them in Passaic, New Jersey on Christmas. We went along to see the show. We ended up being the opening band. It was so cool. The Misfits were so great that night, so were the Necros. It was one of those nights that you're going to remember for a long time. So let me flip through my bookmarks here. After that one, I've got one that says, stabbing, injury, cops. Let's see. Bad crowd, knife. These are all things I want to remember for another episode that I'm going to record. Hanoi Rocks and Nick Cave. That's a great story. It's now 1983 for this next Misfits entry. 11th of June, Santa Monica, California. Henry says, we played with the Misfits at the Santa Monica Civic. It was a pretty cool show. We had Dez and Chavo, the two old singers in the band, play short sets before I went on. Two old singers from Black Flag, that is. It was kind of like the history of the band live. It was a drag that Keith Morris didn't make it to the show. I don't remember why he wasn't there. Perhaps he didn't get along with some of the others. There's a great photo of him with the Misfits at that time. Yeah, 6/11/83. Wait a minute. What happened to April 1982? It's okay. Remember the Christmas show in Passaic, New Jersey with the Misfits in 81? Okay, the book goes from that, finishes out December. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more shows, for crying out loud. I mean, these guys never stop playing. And then the next chapter is 1982. The first entry is for May in Austin, Texas, then Oklahoma City, then Tulsa, Dallas, Georgia, Orlando, blah, 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 blah. We don't get the April at the Whiskey A Go-Go with the Misfits. What the hell? Is it because, I don't know, Black Flag wasn't playing? I suppose so. I suppose he didn't put it in his Black Flag book of diary entries because it wasn't a gig. He was, they're an LA area band, right? I mean, I sound like an idiot because I'm from up here in the Northwest, and LA area is like 50 different cities, right? But maybe it was just Henry. Just Henry went hang out with the Misfits at sound check. Son of a bitch, Henry. I needed you. I needed you to fill in the gaps of the lore of the Misfits legends for me. Me! Someone who was never there and didn't do anything to earn any of this awareness or knowledge. Now, friends, it's time for me to go. I want to thank you very much for being here, especially all you new folks that have never listened to the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll before. Next time, when I talk about Misfits, we are going to get into Crimson Ghost, and we're going to get into Horror Hotel. And I won't have any extra bands to talk about necessarily. I think we're going to focus mostly on Misfits and then call it good. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pull it off before Halloween. I'm going to try really hard, though. I've only got 5 days left. And then someone just called me today to officiate their wedding because their wedding officiator just got COVID and can't be around people. So we'll see what I can do, friends. I want to say thank you for just giving a shit about movies and about music and rock and roll and the history of things that came before you. Thank you for caring about anything anyone else ever did at all. You're a good person. You deserve to have fun in life. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be entertained by wonderful people like me, especially. Don't ever forget it. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is 1-800-273-8255. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, that's RAIN, RAINN, is 1-800-656-4673. You may not need those numbers now, but someday you might. And when that time comes, I hope you come back to this podcast and listen to the entire thing all the way through until you get to this spot, so I get one more play or download from it that I can look at on a graph. But more likely you're going to Google it or you're just going to yell it into your phone. Rock and roll is the best. So are you. I'm glad we have rock and roll for as long as we've had it. I'm glad we will continue to have it for as long as we can. And it is a better world for us all having it. That's the same with you. It's a better world while you're in it. We are glad you're here. Now go find an incredibly sexy person from another planet who is of legally consentable age and have amazing sex with them.